Test, test, test. And we're online with audio. Test, test.
Test, test. Testing, 1, 2, 3. How are you? You having a good day? What's that? Do you want me to go louder? All right. Well, hello there. I'm good. Good.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our special meeting. The agenda for the December 13th Special Council meeting. Number one, I'll call attendance, noting that Councillor Culhane and Councillor Thompson are not present. I'll ask for a disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. Seeing none. The following items will not be dealt with at this meeting today. Items number 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8A, 8B, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And I'll have a motion to go into Committee of the Whole to hear and consider reports, passing recommendations and resolutions with myself in the chair. Motion moved by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Kelly. All in favor, it's carried. For information, we have the Statutory Standard of Care Training, Safe Drinking Water Act 2002. Color copies of the training materials have been provided for Council, and they're also available on the City's website edition of the Council agenda. And so I need to put a resolution on the floor that the education session, Statutory Standard of Care Training, Safe Drinking Water Act 2002 be received. Moved by Councillor Carr, seconded by Councillor Millette. Welcome. I'd like to welcome our Manager of Water, Perry DeCola. I explained to everyone before, Perry, that this is a very important session for us because under the Water Act we have personal liability as members of Council, as directors of the corporation, and so we're looking forward to you providing us with the information so that we can properly do our job safely for ourselves.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So, good evening, everyone. I will attempt to be brief, but this is 120 slides, and it is set for approximately 3 hours of conversation, discussion, and sheer enjoyment. You will laugh, you will cry, you'll kiss the next 3 hours goodbye. So we have responsibilities under the Statutory Standard of Care. That's under the Safe Drinking Water Act. This legislation was put in after Walkerton occurred in 2000. Came into play in 2002, and it created a set of teeth. Prior to that, the rule enforcement was minimal because everything was based on a best practice. When they found the deficiencies as part of the complacencies and issues that occurred, they decided to correct those, to learn from the mistakes, to advance what we do. So, the training material that you have were developed by advisory groups of mayors, councillors, and stakeholders. We have a presentation manual in front of you. The other part is the taking care. And that's a guidebook for elected officials. In this course, what we're going to do is we're going to have the introductory module. That's about the first 24 slides. That's going to cover your legislative responsibilities. It's going to talk about the liabilities. And the liabilities can be huge, and they're personal. So they're not corporate. They're personal liabilities. We'll discuss the multi-barrier approach. And the multi-barrier approach is a methodology which creates minimal risk. We're going to follow that up in Module 2. That's going to be on risk management. Risk management, we're going to cover basic risk management principles. We're also going to talk about risks that are facing our water systems today. We'll look at some case studies for Walkerton, North Battleford, Saskatchewan, Flint, Michigan, and Stratford, Ontario. Each of them had different failures, but everyone had something in common. That was a multiple set of failures. And then, at the end, what do I do now? That's talking about achieving a culture of prevention. Reactive behavior in the water industry is one of the worst ways that we can do business. It's the most expensive way, and it doesn't bring forward the greatest potential for protecting public life. And there'll be some training and succession planning discussions. The importance of such things, because we're seeing the aging of our workforce. We're seeing a change generationally. In the last 15 years, a department that had approximately 30 staff members in it have had 62 staff go through the door in 15 years, which means that when you look at it, it's essentially been every staff member has been replaced, if not more than once. So, in Section 1, that's the introduction. We have the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's vital to health and economy. If you think about it, if your water's not safe, people don't have confidence. If they don't have confidence in what they're drinking, they won't go out. The economic engine of a municipality is their drinking water. If they don't have safe water, they cannot provide restaurants, food processing facilities, healthcare, dialysis clinics. It is a vital aspect of our operation. Ontario residents expect to have safe drinking water wherever they are. It should be high quality and non-offensive. In discussion, how many of you are afraid to drink the water in Toronto? Or Mississauga? Hamilton, well, we won't go to Hamilton, but Hamilton, right up, that's it. We don't have the fears here in Ontario that we have when we go outside of our borders. When we go outside of our borders, the standards and regulations that are in place do not protect human health. They have not the same standards that we have to deal with. So Ontario residents expect it. And in 2000, 7 people died to set this into play. They died a horrible, horrible way. And we'll talk about that in the Walkerton case study. And municipal officials, councillors, managers, we have a direct and legal responsibility now under the Safe Drinking Water Act for ensuring safe, high-quality drinking water. Again, if our customers lose confidence in the water that we produce, we will struggle. Our economies will falter. So, there's 3 things that anyone in the water industry or is responsible for the water industry has to understand. The first is, it's your duty to ensure drinking water quality. We have the statutory standard of care, and it's part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And it is a full legislative act with all the regulations, compliance, and compliance is not optional. Compliance is mandatory that we have to adhere to. It applies, which is kind of interesting. It applies to those with decision-making responsibilities for municipal drinking water systems or those who oversee the system's operation. So the people that are running it and making the decisions on funding and continuation of operations. Councillors, mayors, and senior municipal officials, that's one set of groups. Then, the thing that we have to remember at the end of the day is that legal consequences for failing to carry out their duty. Those things include possible fines or imprisonment, and sometimes it can be both. Not a great start, eh? The second thing, so again, the first thing is we have a duty. The second is that we have to be informed. You need to be informed about your decision-making process. You don't have to be an expert, just informed. You should be asking questions regularly and getting answers. And when you don't get answers, that's when you should be concerned. You should seek advice from those with expertise and act prudently on their advice. So keep yourself up to date. Read the reports. Ask the questions. Richard over there, if you ask Richard any question at any time, he'll get back to you in short order with the details that you require. The last part that we really have to be, that third piece, is we need to be vigilant. Complacency is probably one of the greatest risks that we have. Have you ever driven on the 401? Never. Yes. Have you ever gone down the... Have you ever been in southwestern Ontario? Yes. Have you ever driven between London and Windsor?
A couple times I tried to.
And you don't. You get down there and it's like, how did I end up here?
Flat.
It's flat. you become lulled into a false sense of security, a complacency. And where do horrendous accidents occur? When we become complacent, when we don't take that little extra vigilance. We never simply assume that all is well with our drinking water systems. You have a phone. Is it working?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
No, it's not. Can you prove it?
Come on. Yeah, Larry, it's on.
There. Oh, it's on. Yeah. Okay. Can you turn that off?
It's off.
No, it's not. It's still on.
Okay, whatever. It's off now.
Excellent.
There.
Is it working? That's that vigilance. It's a repetitive cycle. It's almost like an OCD adventure in which we continuously do the same thing, checking, rechecking, ensuring, and validating the information. That's part of the vigilance that we need to apply. We never simply think that the system is safe. And the health of our community depends on that diligence and prudence. And if we don't exercise that diligence and prudence, the potential's there for people to fall ill. Aside from standard of care, do owners have any other oversight responsibilities related to their water systems? You think yes? No? What do you think? Yes. What kind of things would we be looking after? Things like infrastructure repair, maintenance, ensuring quality standards, looking after source water, ensuring that we're not making something worse, following ISO standards, having equipment that's all NSF so that we're not actually putting something detrimental into the system, making it potentially worse. Section 1, duties of the owner and operating authorities. Section 11 of the Safe Drinking Water Act, 2002, that's that SDWA. It describes the legal responsibilities of the owner and operating authorities of a municipal drinking water system. What it does is it lays out all of that groundwork for those liabilities and what we have to do. It's not a choice. It's the law. But it's a minimum standard. As my father always said, aim for the curb, and if you flop on the sidewalk, you did a good job. No, he never said that. He always said aim high. Everything that we're doing in this legislation is a minimum standard, which means we can always do considerably better. And that's what we should be continuously striving for. This has been in effect since 2002. Various parts of the legislation has come in since 2002, 2003, 2004, 2006, 2009, 2012, the last piece. And then we had some other stuff implemented in 2017. Section 11 goes on. Owners and operating authorities are responsible for ensuring that drinking water systems meet the drinking water quality standards and are operated in accordance with the Safe Drinking Water Act and all of its regulations. We have to ensure that it's properly maintained, staffed and supervised by qualified, trained persons. And we have to comply with requirements. Things like sampling, monitoring, testing, notification, and reporting. Is that phone on? We've got to keep going back. We can't stop. Section 19. This goes on a little bit further. What it does is it talks about specific legal responsibilities for decision makers, the people who choose and influence the way that the system runs. It came into force on December 31st of 2012. And it takes the level of care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably prudent person would be expected to exercise in a similar situation. And we're to act with honesty, competency, and integrity when we make our decisions. So do you have to be an expert? No, you don't need to be an expert. You need to act in the way that a reasonably prudent individual would. Now, In your second books, you have your guidelines. On page 10, I'm just going to read on page 10. You're going to see that there's the blue highlighted section, and it says section 19. This is scary. It says, each of the persons listed in subsection 2 shall, A, exercise a level of care, diligence, skill in respect to a municipal drinking water system that a reasonably prudent person would be expected to exercise in a similar situation, and B, act honestly, competently, and with integrity with a view to ensuring the protection and safety of the users of the municipal drinking water system. 2, the following are persons listed for the purpose of subsection 1. The owner of the municipal drinking water system. The municipal drinking water system is owned by the corporation other than a municipality, every officer and director of that corporation. 3, if the system is owned by a municipality, every person who, on behalf of the municipality, oversees the accredited operating authority of the system or exercises decision-making authority over the system. Under the offenses, every person under the duty described in subsection 1 who fails to carry out the duty is guilty of an offense under subsection 32. A person may be convicted of an offense under the section in respect of a municipal drinking water system whether or not the owner of the system is prosecuted or convicted. Sounds terrible. The next section is the one that's actually best for a council. What it says is, a person shall not be considered to have failed to carry out a duty described in subsection 1 in any circumstances in which the person relies in good faith on a report from an engineer, a lawyer, accountant, or a person whose professional qualifications lend credibility to that report. That is part of the safety net. You've built up a system, a team of individuals. Richard at the back, Mr. Reiner, he is part of that team. He provides the diligence and check against the legislative requirements to ensure that the reports that are written meet those requirements and meet your needs to protect you. And if you act upon our decisions and our reports, we absorb that liability because we're putting forward the diligence to ensure that we protect the municipality and every man, woman, and child within this community. So who does it apply to? The owner of a municipal drinking water system typically is the municipal corporation. If the municipal is owned by another corporation, then it goes to their directors. So some systems are operated by companies or arm's-length companies. Those directors are responsible. If the municipal system uses an operating authority, anyone who oversees or makes decisions concerning that operating authority is responsible. And enforcement of the standard of care. A provincial officer can lay a charge against a person or any person to whom the standard applies. Everyone here, the standard applies to them. So a provincial officer from the MECP, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, can lay an order against us. Maximum penalties are $4 million fines and possible imprisonment of up to 5 years. Sounds rather staggering. But you have to do something seriously wrong. That's not because you didn't dot an I or cross a T. That's a criminal negligence. And that gets decided in a place like a court of law. Because the actual penalties would be decided by a court. And it depends on the severity and the consequences. People getting sick, people dying, increase the severity and consequences of any infraction. The multi-barrier approach. I like the multi-barrier approach. It keeps us safe. I like to think of it like Swiss cheese. Do you like Swiss cheese, Councillor Williams? You do not? Oh, can you tell me anything about it, though? Councillor Sanderson? Lots of holes. Now, if I took a piece of Swiss cheese and I put it up against my face, other than looking very strange, what do you notice about that? Can I still see you? And if I took another piece of Swiss cheese and rotated it at 90 degrees, what happens to the holes? And another piece. And another piece. I don't completely eliminate risk, but what I do is I bring it down to something that's manageable to make it almost negligible. The multi-barrier approach is like a hockey team. You have your forwards, you have your defense, and you have your goalie. Each layer provides a level of defense. 5 people in front of the goalie, and the goalie's the 6th one. Well, in our systems, we have source water protection. We have effective treatment. So if we protect our source, we have a process that can deal with the water that we're bringing in. We need to have a secure distribution. We have to have an effective and diligent monitoring system. Is your phone working? Because we have to make sure it's diligent. We have to keep doing it. We can never stop. And at the end of the day, we have to have an effective management. And that effective management is to ensure that the numbers that are recorded are correct, that we've planned to move forward. We've made decisions to strengthen our operation and to do everything that we can to protect public health. Failure of a single barrier alone will not lead to a disaster. We can have source water contamination, but all of the other pieces in the puzzle that are later after it can help eliminate the risk to the customer, eliminate the risk to our system. Whenever we've had a historical disease outbreak, more than one barrier has failed. It's always the case, isn't it, Councillor Millett? It's not one thing goes wrong. There's always a series of events. This went wrong, and then you got flustered and you did that. It just keeps adding one on top of each other. So what ends up happening is we might have a source water contamination, which our plant can't effectively treat, and someone let it through, and it gets out to the distribution system, and we didn't know that it was there, which means we weren't effectively monitoring it. Then people get sick. Source water protection. This one's changing. Source water protection plans are mandatory for municipal residential drinking water systems in Ontario. We have no choice. We're supposed to protect areas that are around our intakes. Those are called IPZs, or intake protection zones. And they're a radius out from our intakes. Or wellhead protection areas if you're in a rural area. Again, to protect the source water. Bill 66 that was announced on the weekend, or some of the details. The Canadian Environmental Legislative Association had pointed out that there's changes that are coming. There's exemptions to Bill 66 that will allow people to supersede that part right there, the protection and the planning. Because certain hotspot activities should not be done in close proximity to the intake. Because if you're doing it, it could make it from the source to the intake in half an hour. You might not be able to have a response fast enough to react to shut down the system to protect human health. But if you can provide 25 jobs, they might allow that. But they still haven't, that's part of the Clean Water Act, which is part of source water protection. If the planning impacts the drinking water, that's a completely different act, which I don't know if that's actually been considered. So what could happen is we could allow a planning of an activity that has previously been prohibited in our intake area, and what do? It impacts our water quality in our drinking water facilities. Now it's the Drinking Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, that comes into play. And will they be able to go back and say, but you didn't protect your drinking water because you allowed this to happen? Because we gave you the opportunity to bypass the rule. But that's new. So that's hopefully one that people will be working on. Plans are being implemented to manage the risks to quality and quantity of municipal drinking water. This is another one, the Oak Ridge Moraines. They put prohibitions on expansion of property in that area because they were extracting much more water than was percolating back into the system. So they put a moratorium on construction. Because when you put houses and roads and things like that, that prevents the percolation of water into the soil, which doesn't allow the aquifer to recharge. In 20 years, they withdrew what was the equivalent of almost 100 years of recharged water. So they stopped the advancement of construction, the suburban sprawl, to allow water to go back in, to allow the percolation, to prevent the loss of that store, of that territory. That's also been changed under Bill 66. So that could, again, create issues for municipalities. So it's something just to be aware of in advance. Municipalities are responsible for implementing many of the policies in this plan. So we have to set out monitoring. There could be landfills, there could be operations, there could have been old fuel dumps, things of that nature within the proximity of your intake or your water source. So we have to continue to monitor those things. And failure to implement those properties can put our water systems at risk. And it's not source water, it's drinking water. To continue on with source water protection, any new or expanded municipal drinking water system in a source protection area is subject to Regulation 205-18 under the Safe Drinking Water Act, which means it was released in 2018. It was earlier this year, released, I believe, in April. Owners must ensure that new systems are included in the local source water protection before providing drinking water to the public. Fairly straightforward. To continue on, Source Protection Information Atlas, it's available through ontario.ca. It's an interactive mapping tool. It'll allow you to go see areas that are vulnerable to contaminants, indicates where local source protection plans and policies are in place. Materials are available through our Conservation Authority in Belleville, Quinte Conservation. They are the spearhead. They are the ones that drive the source water protection in this area. And its legislated training is provided by the province for appointing risk management officials and inspectors. On the treatment side, the source water, as councillors and elected officials and decision makers, you protect source water by planning through our planning department in consultation with environmental services. In treatment, this is the environmental services. The treatment process ranges from simple disinfection to highly specialized complex technologies. The critical role of treatment is the removal, inactivation of pathogens. And that term pathogen is very specific. Pathogen causes disease. It's not a question of, will I get sick? The question is, when will I get sick? Pathogens that are out there, like Campylobacter jejuni, E. coli, Giardia, more common name, beaver fever, not Bieber, causes the same effects, bleeding the ears, bloody diarrhea, and the whole bit. We also have Cryptosporidium. And Cryptosporidium, once it develops a hard protein oocyst shell on the outside, what it does is that you could actually take that and place it in 2.5% sodium hypochlorite. You know your household Javex? That 2.5% stuff, the stuff that we're getting now for 97 cents. You can put it straight in that, and it's not going to touch it. It won't kill it. We physically have to remove it. We have to use a process called chemically assisted filtration. And then we have further disinfection, which will inactivate or kill pathogenic organisms. The critical role of treatment is the removal and inactivation of pathogens. Now, there's something that I do, it's called the alum-do-si-do, but we might switch it today and not do it. But it was great fun. You always pull two people aside and you say that they're the pathogens, and you bring everyone else into the center, and you say, do you see these two? When you see these people, you just feel like throwing up. They make you sick. And then everyone else that's in the middle, they're all laughing because we've just described two pathogens, Cryptosporidium and Giardia. The only way to get rid of them is physically removal through that coagulation, flocculation, sedimentation process. Well, everyone's laughing at these two. Normally, I would step forward and say, that was pretty funny, right? It's fun to laugh at other people. And I say, do you know what you are in the water? And I say, you're the dirt balls because it's the trapped dirt or suspended solids that are in the water. Now, dirt has a charge to it. And is dirt positively or negatively charged?
It's negative.
It's negative. You know how you remember that? Well, you would remember that because if someone called you a dirt ball, it's a negative connotation. And dirt is negatively charged, so we add a bridging agent or a positive thing. And what it does is it strips. It creates a zeta potential. It allows the bridging of material together. It's almost like stickiness. When we put stuff in a confined area, the water gets this homogeneous solution. It gets mixed throughout in a rapid mix program because we use very complex terms in water treatment because rapid mix is just mixing rapidly. Anyhow, we put it in a confined area. We get that rapid dispersion of the chemical. It coats the dirt, creating bridging that makes things clump together. And when it clumps together, it removes its energy. It increases its weight, and it allows it to settle. And when it does that, it traps the pathogenic organisms. And that's where we remove the majority of our pathogenic organisms. It's through that sedimentation, flocculation process. Then we have disinfection. And disinfection is specific for each facility. We could have 4 different water treatment facilities in a municipality, and each of them will have a different requirement for disinfection to prove that they have met the demand and provided the protection to keep people safe. Now, when there's a demand, if I lent you $100, what would my demand be? $100 in return. And knowing me, it would probably be a little extra for the protection because we have a demand that we meet, and then we add a residual on top of that to provide protection as the water goes out into our system. Now, when we have a disinfection requirement, we have to meet that because what it does is it meets a primary disinfection, which kills off or inactivates pathogens that have gotten through the system that are small enough to get through. And in treatment, it's essentially a series of smaller and smaller holes until we make it so that only very little things can get through. And we allow enough contact with chlorine in which it kills it. Now, when I do training sessions to describe CT, or contact time, I usually pick someone from the audience and I give them a hug, just a quick one. I said, that wasn't too bad. They go, no, it wasn't. And I said, now it's going to get a lot worse because then I hold on to them for a longer period of time. And I said, you feel like you're dying now, don't you? And they go, yes. And then I put their head on their shoulder. They go, I want to die. Which is an example. It's the way that chlorine attaches to the microorganisms that are in the water. That's providing the disinfection. And the longer that it stays in contact, the greater the potential of killing it off is. And disinfection is one of numerous processes. Now, the distribution system. Oh, wow. Water will be only safe if quality is maintained to the customer's tap. However, utilities are generally responsible for safety to the consumer's property line or their plumbing system. We only have standards up to a certain point. Where do we have standards to, Richard? Just to the property line. What happens after that? It's up to the homeowner. So they don't follow a municipality's standards when it goes past the property line. So the potential's there that they could use products that could decay water quality, could create issues, and potentially impact the municipal source. So if they had a well, but it's impossible to get a pump that can overpower city's pressure, correct? No? No? That could happen? That's fairly easy? You mean you could go to Canadian Tire and buy a pump that could outstrip 60 PSI? Oh. So if you had that, so say you had a well in your house and you had a cross connection, could you technically pump that well water into our system? You could. The distribution is a scary place. We have old infrastructure. There's risks with that. There's leaks and points of entry for pathogens. So, I don't know, have you ever seen a pipe with a hole in it? Yeah, when it has a hole in it and it's under pressure, it makes this sound. It goes, psst, which means it's coming out. It's under positive pressure. Water's squirting out. And when we put pipe in the ground, we always keep like 10 meters, right, Richard, between the water and sewer lines. That's always been the history, right? No, not quite. Sometimes they're in the same trench is what you're saying then. But it's okay because we put an impervious material between the pipes. It's called gravel. Water can't flow through that, right? No. And we have no sewer pipes that ever leak, like clay pipe, right? So what we end up having is we have this that's in the vicinity of our sewage lines. And when it's in the vicinity of our sewage lines, if our water lines have a break or get undercut, what are the potentials for a sewage line to be broken or undercut? Now, if we have fecal material, or poop, coming from the sewage system, mixing with water in the gravel, which is impervious, right? No water will ever pass through gravel. If we had a pressure inversion, so suddenly the pressure went from to we could bring that poop soup into our pipes. The infrastructure is old. Replacement cycles are between 80 and 100 years. It's very expensive. Dollar-wise, Richard, what's the approximate budget cost for a 1 meter of pipe? $1,500 for this, for that dimension. And we have how many kilometers in Belleville? 215 kilometers. So 215,000 times this measurement if we had to replace the pipe. So if you're looking at a replacement cycle, spending $3 or $4 million a year in a municipality the size of Belleville is just needed to maintain infrastructure to a 100-year life expectancy. 18% of all waterborne diseases and outbreaks in the U.S. were caused by distribution system deficiencies. Cross connections, breaks, points of intrusion, failures in reservoirs, contamination. And the problem is that when the water gets out of the treatment plant, if we put some of those tough chemicals back into the system, like cryptosporidium, which could be brought in by rabbits or rats or things like that get into our water supply, there's nothing to stop the spread. In England, a reservoir that provided water for 250,000 people created a case of cryptosporidiosis in 1993, in which 250,000 residents were not allowed to use their water. 50-some-odd people became ill because a rabbit got through a screen and fell to its death inside the reservoir, finished water reservoir. Something as simple as a screen failure can create the potential route of intrusion. When we're looking at our monitoring, that's that fourth part. That's where I keep coming back to you, Councillor Kelly, and asking you, is that phone working?
Yes, it is. I'll check.
Okay. We've got to make sure.
It's on.
Okay, perfect.
Turn it off.
Perfect. Excellent,
Diligence.
excellent, excellent, excellent. Because we're checking to ensure that it's working all the time. We have requirements for treated water compliance monitoring, and we have increased specifically. Safe Drinking Water Act includes some fail-safe actions that we have to look at, and that's for the protection of everyone's water. We have to have continuous monitoring of critical parameters. And that's chlorine and turbidity. So we have to provide this continuous monitoring so that we can continually see. Because it's rather inconvenient me keep coming back and asking you. I'm sorry, what did Richard want? Sorry, I think he wants your attention for a second. Because at some point, this is going to disappear. That phone, that sample site might be missed. And if you miss an opportunity, was the water safe? So I put these continuous analyzers in place. Those analyzers will take samples all the time. That's the term, continuous. We're not very tricky with our word selection in water. We monitor for chlorine because chlorine provides a level of protection. Because if I've met the demand, that means that everything that's supposed to be consuming chlorine is gone. And if I have extra chlorine in there, if that's disappearing, that's telling me something else is in there. Or the water's getting really old, allowing it to decay. Most definitely.
Just a quick one. Talk about this is one of the barriers to monitoring. Like, just, can you bring it home to Belleville? Like, how many times a day are you checking it, or what's the people going around in white coats checking numbers all the time? Like, what's the process?
The process in the city of Belleville. So we have 12 filters at the plant. We have 2 reservoirs, an elevated storage, and a pumping station. So we monitor the chlorine residual at our 3 stations. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and they run continuously. We record the information once per minute, which is 60 times greater than the legislative requirement, because it's only to be done once per hour. But the analyzers are running all the time, which means that at any point in time, so even though I'm only capturing information once every minute, if any time between that 1 minute period that a number either goes too low or too high, it triggers an alarm. And the alarm has to sound where the operator is. And the reason it's got to sound where the operator is because it means you've got to do something. Whenever an alarm goes off in a facility, it's done so that there is a response. It's cataloged, it's recorded, it's put into a database which is auditable. An inspector can come in and request that database and say, what did you do on August 15th at 1:37 a.m. in response to that alarm? Then they'll go to the book and they'll find the acknowledged alarm, increased residual, or sent someone out, whatever was done to deal with that remedial action. So it is continuous. And our facilities in Belleville, or the facilities here in Belleville, are run 24 hours a day under constant monitoring, under human supervision. Alarms and automatic shut-off devices are also put in place. It's part of a barrier. So again, this is monitoring, both in plant and in the distribution. So if a situation was going at such that we got too high, or think of it like a boiler, or a pressure cooker, or your hot water tank. If the pressure in the system gets too high, there's a relief, and it'll blow it off instead of allowing the tank to explode. In our process, what happens is that you'll have an alarm, and it'll create a fail-safe, which means that I'm not going to let you go that far to make a mistake. I'm going to shut it down, because if I shut it down, I'm not directing to the people of the city. And the production of water that's unsafe for the citizens, that's when we get in trouble. That's when we have to worry about what we're creating. The citizens are the driving factor. So, in the monitoring, there is that continuous monitoring. There is the grab sampling. So we do about 80 bacteriological samples per month. Ballparkish. We do all sorts of chemical analysis. That's what the treatment operators and the distribution operators and the lab operators, they do. But it's always part of writing it down. Because in this world, if it's not written down, Councillor Carr, it doesn't exist. That's the currency. If you had $2 and your good name and you went to Tim Hortons, could you get a large double-double? Yes. Yes. If you didn't have the $2, could you get it just with your good name? No. that recording of information, that checking of information, having someone else verify that that information is correct, that's that accounting and diligence. That's part of the monitoring process. And then at the end is the management. That's the fifth of the barriers. All other 4 barriers can fail. And if the 4 barriers fail, great. I need to tell you what you need to do to protect yourself. That's what your operations have to do. They need to inform. Councillor Sanderson, have a drink of your water. Sure. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I put X-Lax in that. It's going to be a bad night, isn't it? Now, I'm going to ask you a question. How would you feel about me? Not very good. Not very good. Let's try that example again. Have a drink. By the way, I put X-Lax in that water. Whose decision is it now to drink it? It's yours. That's the fundamental failure in Walkerton, was the management. If that was a poison or something that could cause illness, and you couldn't protect your family, those that you love, those that are most important to you, your children, your parents, how would you feel about the people that did that to you? You wouldn't be very happy with them. Sometimes when I do that example, people say they wouldn't find my body if I did that to their children. And that's an appropriate response. Because at the end of the day, you have that fundamental right to make a decision on whether or not you decide to follow the orders of boiling the water or not drinking it. It's your choice. And we can't take that away. Proper management gives people the choice to make their decisions about their personal health and safety. And that's what fundamentally broke down in Walkerton. Owner and management staff of a water system must provide that effective oversight. When it goes wrong, you can't sweep it under a rug. You got to stand up and say, I did it. It's me. Heads up. Take this precautionary action. It might sound bad, but if you have a food producer, a restaurant produces food, and multiple people are eating at that restaurant, especially in a contaminated area, that spreads it. If you have a food producer, for example, like when we had an infant formula manufacturer in the city of Belleville, that product went all over the world. So if the product had been bad or there had been something wrong with it, we can affect a much larger area outside of our borders. And if it comes back, then you have to look at the potential implications for the municipality, because now we've went outside of our own boundaries and we've impacted and negatively impacted people outside based on their decisions. The drinking water quality management system must be in place for all residential systems. Now, that's called the DWQMS. And we have that in process. And what it is, it's like an ISO for us. It's specifically designed for water. Richard, do you have a copy of one here? That's the say what you do what you say. You walk the walk, you talk the talk. If I say I will be here Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and I've got that written down in the procedure, at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, I will be here. That's how we live our life. That's how the water systems are run, to provide that diligence, to provide the layer of security. And sometimes it might seem excessive. It might seem regressive sometimes. But it's to provide that layer of protection for all of the residents of a municipality. The drinking water quality management system, it's a requirement of all municipal residential drinking water systems. In the city of Belleville, there are 2 systems. The city of Belleville's and the Point Hamlet, or the hamlet of Point Anne. Each one of them has the same system in place, where it outlines a set of standard operating procedures, emergency operating procedures. What do we do when something goes wrong? Who do we call? What's our means of communication? How are we going to ensure that we're staying current? How do we make sure that the equipment is actually viable and reading correctly? And then, how often do we do this to ensure that we keep it accurate. Owners are ultimately responsible. Walkerton provides training on DWQMS. Many municipalities have taken advantage of it, the City of Belleville included. It requires a written endorsement and commitment from top management and system owner. So, with the change in council, the municipality and the council will receive the commitment letter again in the new year to endorse the DWQMS. And it just requires that you understand that the drinking water system carries a responsibility. And the first step, you're providing it today by taking the training. The drinking water quality management system requires evidence. Evidence of commitment. So this is proof. Evidence is used in a court of law, correct? And when it's in a court of law, it's irrefutable. It's recorded. It ensures that the quality management system meets the requirements of the standard. So these were all designed in-house to ensure that we could meet, or the municipality can meet, the standard. It ensures that the operating authority is aware of the requirements and passes that information on so that the council's elected officials and decision makers can make an informed decision. It provides communication details of the quality management system. So who speaks to whom, when, where, and how? How is it conveyed? How do we answer and allay your fears? And it provides resources to maintain the continual improvement of the system. The system has to get better every day. As time goes on, we learn more things. And as we learn more things, we have to change that fundamental basis, where our touchstone is. The touchstone's here today. Tomorrow, it's down the field. If we just stay in the same spot, eventually we'll be passed, and we won't be compliant. We have to stay ahead of that curve. And the DWQMS, or the Quality Management Plan in this case, it makes sure that we provide the resources for infrastructure rehabilitation, to meet deficiencies in treatment, to look at improper training, to provide for the proper staffing. That was Module 1. I'll have a drink of water. Did anyone need a break, or would you like me to continue so that you may go home? Then we will continue. So, in Module 2, we're going to talk about risk management. Because we cannot eliminate risk, can we? All we can do is mitigate it and manage it. We'll talk about the common risks for drinking water systems and how we can reduce the risks. And reducing the risk reduces the exposure for elected officials, council members, decision makers, and, much like that water, your personal risk for health and safety. That's the circle of drips. We've all seen CIs, or continual improvement models. This is how the water industry has to go. We have a 3-year cycle on everything that we do. Your operational plan is part of the drinking water quality management system. And what it does, the operational plan includes source water, system description, risk assessment. But it follows that circle. You plan. What are we going to do? Then we go out and do it. Is that phone working? Yeah, that's right. We got to check. Got to keep checking. And eventually, you're going to leave that on, so you'll never turn it, or you'll put it away. There you go. That's part of the continual improvement. Then I'll have to come up with another plan on how I can torment you to check if something's working. And then you're going to have someone else help you to improve on it. It's to stay ahead of that game. And that's part of that process, that continual improvement. And it's not just in water treatment or in the distribution, but it's in every facet. It's ingrained in every decision-making process in QMS. What is safe drinking water? Well, as it says up there, We cannot achieve zero risk. There's nothing that's risk-free, right? Only guarantees in life, what do they say, death and taxes? You don't have to pay taxes. Don't say that in front of a municipality. But what happens if you don't pay taxes? You go to jail. So the only thing that's actually 100% in life is death. If you're born, you will die. For the rest of the things, all we can do is try to reduce. And in this case, for safety purposes, we want to reduce the risk to public health to a negligible level, a level that is unseen. Now, has the drinking water system in your municipality made anyone sick? That's a fair question. What do you think? I don't know. Could be. Maybe. Prior to 2002, there were really no rules. It was the Wild, Wild West. System's been around for 120 years or more, from the 1880s, when we took water straight from the Bay of Quinte, untreated, and pumped it up. People thought that was amazing. So, don't know. Is that phone working? That's why we keep checking. We don't know. The problem with disease outbreak is that most waterborne diseases are undetected. It's scary. You can see by this spike, there becomes what's known as a threshold of detection by healthcare systems. Councillor Culhane, there is always an endemic rate that's out there of illness and disease that doesn't create a threshold and it doesn't make the alarm bells. But if suddenly you're in an emergency room and dozens of people started coming in, all complaining of gastrointestinal distress, bloody diarrhea, vomiting, other than it being a mess and really requiring house cleaning, what would go off at that point? If it was just one person?
Just one person.
Yeah.
Not a bus tour.
Not a bus tour.
Where'd you eat last?
Yeah. Or,
In the last 24 hours.
yeah, and where'd you eat? And what do people always say? Oh, I must have a 24-hour flu. Is there such a thing as the 24-hour flu? Not with bloody diarrhea. That's food poisoning. Or that's contamination with a pathogen. Something like E. coli or Campylobacter jejuni. It's not until you get a high enough threshold, and that was something that happened in Walkerton. They were looking at restaurants. They were looking at trying to find what tied you to this victim, to that victim, to that victim. We know what got you already. That was me. And sometimes they can't find, well, I ate at this restaurant, and I was at home, and I was gone, and I did this. There's no commonality. That's when they start looking at water. But the thresholds are high. The epidemiology for Walkerton was greater than 80 people suffering from bloody diarrhea and vomiting. It was nasty. 80 people was the threshold for a town of 5,000. And how many didn't go? Lots. So that's the problem. You can have undetected outbreaks in the system. So if you don't provide the diligence, you don't provide the monitoring, you don't provide the testing, the maintenance and upkeep, and the watchful eye on the system, that could be happening in the background. It's not fear mongering, it's a reality. It's something that can happen when you have, as Richard said, 215 kilometers of pipe that's unseen. And what could be happening in an industry or a meat processing facility or a dairy facility or a morgue. Sorry, I had to go to the morgue. That could be bad. It could be Steve all day in the pipes. Sorry, that was dark. My apologies. When we talk about risk, we have to consider three aspects of risk. We have to look at the hazardous event, and the risk itself, the risk to public health. Now, the hazard is an agent that can cause public harm to public health. That could be biological. like E. coli, Campylobacter, Giardia, crypto, and a whole host of other things, like the stuff that happens to the old guys that used to be in the war. Oh, no, Legionella, Salmonella, all of those various diseases, all the Ellas, they can impact our health and safety. Those are biological. We can have chemical. We could have a backflow from an industry into the system, putting a chemical in. Now, I don't know if you remember Atlanta in 2014, where their water smelled like licorice. A company spilled, I think it was just over 2,000 liters of a solvent that had a anisette type smell and taste into the water, and it went right through the facility. There was nothing to take it out. It was a chemical. Went right through the treatment plant and made it into the distribution system. There was a stop using water. All they could do was continue to flush and monitor until they could find no traceable levels. That's a chemical risk. We've talked about biological. There's radiological, and then there's physical. And physical are usually in relationship to turbidity. And turbidity is the cloudiness or dirt in the water. And if there's dirt in the water, what it does is it provides protection or shielding from chlorine. Because chlorine's still in the pipes to prevent the reoccurrence or potential regrowth of bacteria that are harmful. Now, if you have a big piece of dirt in the water, a pathogen can glob on behind it and provide protection so that the chlorine cannot disable it. I always used to do this by finding someone who's usually bigger than I am, and I can hide behind them, and I tell someone else that they're chlorine, and they have to throw a punch at me, and they can't get through because I'm always hiding behind someone. You would have been a perfect person to choose because you have enough size that I can hide relatively well. Yeah. So you can't. Those are the hazards, the biological, chemical, radiological, and physical risks. Then we have an event. And what the event is how it gets into our system. It's what creates or what fails to remove the hazard. Our process is set up to remove turbidity. Our process is set up to react and oxidize out some of the chemicals that are there that's normally accessible in our water. Our processes are set up to deal with the biological aspects, either to remove it through the coagulation, flocculation, and sedimentation process, through filtration, or to kill it through disinfection. Now, an example is a heavy rainfall event. Heavy rainfall event creates saturation in the soil. Saturation in the soil means that suddenly water cannot percolate anymore. Then it runs off, hence the term runoff. As it runs off, it grabs everything along its way. Every piece of fertilizer, dog poop, whatever you call, it ends up in our source water with high levels of turbidity, high levels of bacteria. Some of the most dangerous water to be around is water in storm ponds. Storm ponds are not water features. Storm ponds are areas that will collect all of the detritus and detriment in an area and funnel it to a place where it can slow down enough that it's used as a treatment process to drop it out. It's not a water feature. Don't ever put fountains in storm ponds because all you're doing is aspirating E. coli and various pathogens. Do you remember Milton, the beautiful fountain that they had in that storm pond? People were getting sick because they were being exposed to E. coli. And it was aspirating, and they were breathing it in. So, the event, the hazardous event, what it does is it creates a route of entry into the system or a potential failure. If you had a car filter and you threw 10 pounds of sand at it, it's going to plug up. It's going to fail, and it's going to tear. And that sand will make it potentially into the engine. Well, if you throw a whole bunch of turbidity because of a huge amount of runoff, and the water went from clear to the color of consistency of chocolate milk, and the system can't handle it, the filter's going to fail. And if the filter fails, those pathogens can break through. That's what we call it. It's called breakthrough, if it breaks through the filter, because it breaks through. Again, we don't use complicated terms. We never use biblical words. It's just we try to sound smarticle sometimes. Now, the hazardous event puts it in. The risk, Now we have to run a matrix, and we have to consider, what's the likelihood of this hazard occurring? How often it has occurred? Has it occurred once a month, once a week, 3 times a year, 4 times a year, once every year, once every 5 years, or it's never happened? Because a risk could be a meteorite falling on the water plant. It's possible, not very probable. And that's where it comes into this matrix. We look at things. What's the likelihood of the event? What's the probability of it? And if it does happen, how bad is it? Could it be catastrophic? Does it make the water unusable? Could it make all of the municipal residents sick by exposure? Those are 3 things that go into an element of the QMS. And that element of the QMS is element 8. If you ever want to see it, if you can't sleep at night, Richard will be happy to provide you with the information that's necessary. We were going to bring it tonight, but in all honesty, I think you're struggling enough to stay awake as it is. You've had many late evenings. The guiding principle for reducing risk. The number one thing that we have to do to reduce risk is to get rid of the pathogens. They're the greatest risk. Pathogen means disease causing. It's not a question. If a pathogen is present, people will get sick, and people could die. We need to create robust multiple barriers. They're essential. Each of those layers protecting the source, ensuring that the treatment is effective, making sure that the psst doesn't go in the distribution system by renewing the pipe, monitoring it. There you go. It's on, isn't it? Yeah, monitoring, and then verifying that, yes, it is on, so that's the effective management. Trouble is usually preceded by change. Change is unfamiliar. Slow and steady wins the race in treatment or in water. When you make things chock-a-block, or if you look at driving on the 401, the speed limit on the 401 is, it's 100. It's not 101, it's 100. It's not 119 because the police officer will not pull me over. It's 100. Now, if people kept a safe distance between themselves and the vehicle in front of them and didn't slow out or speed up, there would be no injuries, no accidents. The way that this is usually demonstrated is that you get people up and you have them walk at 1 arm's length apart. And you have someone walk in front, usually me. And then I stop. And what happens? That entire chain, because people have become complacent or have not thought about it, suddenly start to bunch up and collide. Change is that way for treatment. Slow and steady provides that spacing. You don't make a whole bunch of changes. You're not reactionary. You plan. You're proactively making a decision. You make a decision today for an hour from now, for a day from now, for 2 years from now, to keep that bunching up from happening. Operators must be capable and responsive, which means that they have to be, number 1, trained, number 2, available. And drinking water professionals have to be accountable to the consumer. At the end of the day, customer confidence is what we have to own. If water tastes funny, if it looks funny or smells funny, it's probably not safe, right? That's what you'd think. See, water has that capacity to take on the tastes and odors and appearance of what's in it. If you put orange crystals in it, it's going to look orange. If you put tea in it, it's going to smell and taste like tea. If you put grass in it, it's going to smell and taste like grass. If you put meat in hot water, you make soup, right? I won't go into hot tubs then, because what's that? Basically which is meat in hot water. That's soup, okay? It's kind of gross. So, I won't ruin hot tubs, I promise. The drinking water professionals have to be responsible to the consumer. They have to be accountable. They have to be able to deal. Are you checking to see if his phone's on? They have to be sure that the water is safe. And again, one example was in Walkerton. Walkerton, huge issue. No doubt. It took 9 months to stabilize that process. 9 months, $60 million. If they did it right, would have cost about $250,000. So you can see what your return on investment is. It's not really a great buy to be reactive. It's much better to be proactive. Anyhow, a gentleman called up the Walkerton Clean Water Center in the summer of 2012. This is 12 years after the incidents that occurred in Walkerton. And he asked, is it okay to stop boiling my water? He had been boiling his water for 12 years because he didn't have the confidence in a system that failed him. I'm going to pick on Councillor McCaw. Councillor McCaw, if I lie to you, how long will I be a liar? Forever. That's the appropriate answer. If I lie to you, I will be a liar for? Till death do us part. Exactly.
Unless you go to confession.
No. You ain't getting out with 3 Hail Marys and an Our Father, okay? That was the case again. They robbed people of their decision-making process, and then on top of it, no, it's okay. It's safe. Don't worry. It might taste like poop, but it's okay. It's safe. It might taste like a steak. That's value added. No, it's not. So we have to own that. And then we have to take good risk management requirements. And to do that, we have to be informed, and we have to provide the information to the decision makers of our municipalities. Our elected officials have to have information that's provided in a format that's straightforward, drop the jargon, in a way that you can make an effective decision based on what a reasonable person would do. And that information being provided to you is by an engineer or a water professional or a consultant. And if, Richard, you weren't sure how to do this, what would we do? What would you do? Bring someone in so that we're relying on their expertise, because it might be beyond the expertise of those that are here. Because you never want to hear someone say, well, we haven't got a clue, but we're just going to wing it. What kind of confidence would that inspire in you? Zero. I've never built a house before, but trust me, I'll build your house. You don't do that. And again, good risk management requires that information provided to you. Are there pathogens in untreated source water for your drinking water? So, do you think there's anything dangerous in the Bay of Quinte? Yeah. You bet. Think about it this way. Out of the 100 days that were available for swimming at Zwick's Island, the health unit would say, 60 days, don't swim in that water. You'll get a nose infection, you'll get an eye infection, an ear infection, a skin infection. Dear God, we don't know what you're going to get, but don't go in the water. Then they said, okay, take that water and treat it in such a way that people can flush the toilet, water their lawn, clean a car. Oh yeah, and by the way, every single drop has to be safe to drink. Less than 2% of the water that's produced in any municipality or any municipal facility is used for drinking. So the pipe that's this big leaving the plant might only need to be this big to provide drinking water for a municipality. But what 2% are you going to use? You don't know. So it all has to be safe. Our source water is contaminated. The Bay of Quinte is a wonderful source. Officially, it's classified as a shallow, warm, eutrophic body of water with high nutrient loading that can develop algae and bacteria in sufficient numbers to cause persistent illness. Things like cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, which if you've been along the bay shore, you'll see the lovely signs that have been put up warning about, if you see this, don't play in it. Source water protection. Pathogens pose the greatest risk. Again, that's the number one thing. As elected officials, as municipal workers, as water professionals, the number one thing we have to do is get rid of the pathogens. Pathogens cause disease. Other contaminants is less certain. Pathogens are everywhere that humans and animals are found. Because normally, the pathogen exists in an excretory system. When you eat, you must excrete. That's how they say it. So think about it. The excretion is not the part that should go back up towards the top. If the critters are found in the waste products, they're probably not good for us. And any place that a cow, livestock, or any animal is found, that's where we can find it. So for example, Giardia, the common name is beaver fever. It's not because a beaver's sitting in the water. The beaver's using it for another purpose. Pathogen sources are never far from water sources. Water is necessary because we need water. Where do we congregate? Where do we build our cities? Where do we build our industry? It was by the water because it was an easy means of transportation. And pathogens can be removed or inactivated. We do not sterilize water in drinking water. To sterilize it, the only way you can is boiling it. You inactivate or destroy. The example would be if you were given a shotgun. There's a shotgun. If you aim it at me and you pull the trigger, bang, there's a hole. What comes out of that hole? What? The insides. If the insides come outside, you die. Chlorine works that same way. It destabilizes the outer membrane of the microorganism, causing the membrane to rupture. Membrane ruptures, critter dies. I'll go to you. Here's a needle and thread. Stitch my mouth shut. With pleasure, right? Okay, so if you stitch my mouth shut, what can I do? I can speak, or just sound silly. But I can't eat. If I can't eat, I'm going to starve rather quickly, correct? Yes. Chlorine works that way. It works like the needle and thread. It interferes with the way that the microorganism is able to process its food. If it can't bring it into its body or processes, it starves. If it starves, it dies. Last methodology. Here's a pair of hedge clippers. Can you take those from me? Excellent. You know what they... Now, I'm walking away from it because we're not going to demonstrate that one because the hedge clipper acts as a mutagen, interfering with the reproductive capabilities of the microorganism. If the microorganism can't make more of itself, it doesn't make you as sick. Because again, in the most fundamental path or fundamental terminology, a pathogen eats. And when it eats, it excretes. It produces a byproduct. And we hear that it's the metabolic byproducts or the waste products. It's essentially a bacteriological poop. That's the most rude, crude way of saying it, but it's an effective way to remember it. So the bacteria use you as a toilet. Their byproducts our bodies can't handle. It creates high temperatures, bloody diarrhea, robs water from our systems, creates illness, vomiting. Our body tries to evacuate from us. If there's more and more of them, our body becomes overwhelmed, and then eventually, things like our kidneys fail. Our organs fail, and we die. The pathogens are the most dangerous part. They must be removed or inactivated. Here's some of the pathogen types that we have. Norovirus, which is a virus. It's persistent in water for a long time, and it's relatively resistant to chlorine. The norovirus, I think you've heard of that. There was a cruise ship that had that. 5,000 people on board, and it's both sides. You don't know whether to sit or to kneel. It's a horrible, horrible illness. There's Campylobacter and E. coli. That's what was found in Walkerton. They have moderate life expectancies in water, but they're not very resistant to chlorine, which means chlorine can destroy them. There's Giardia and Cryptosporidium. Those are protozoas. Those things can live a long time in water or a moderate period of time in water. But something like Cryptosporidium, again, highly resistant to chlorine. The only way to get rid of them is to physically remove them through that process of coagulation, flocculation. Pathogens, you can see this seems to be very repetitive. At the end, there will be, I don't do tests, it's a celebration of knowledge. We'll celebrate all the knowledge that we learned. 10 celebratory questions. But you can see that's rather repetitive, so you could think that pathogens might have a high level of need for this. There's lesser risks, things like high levels of arsenic, fluoride, selenium, nitrates, and lead. They pose risks to human health. They can either cause blue baby for nitrates, for example. Arsenic, well, it's a poison. Fluoride can cause fluoridosis. And lead can cause the slowing or the impedance of mental development and interfering with nervous systems. Many of the chemicals, like toxics, like pesticides, they can pose site-specific risks. So things like spraying for pesticides should always be discouraged in parks that have large water basins in them because they have vents that allow air to come in and go out. So if you're spraying toxins or pesticides around, the potential's there for contamination. They're not common. They're not supposed to be there. If they're meant to kill bugs and critters and grass, they'll probably do that to us. They're detectable in very small amounts, and if you detect them, you got to meet the regulations, which means that if you hit a threshold, and this is in the parts per billion, if you hit any of those thresholds, it's adverse, which means now I have to tell you, don't drink that water. There's a potential that there's a risk of contamination by pesticide. Find an alternate source for drinking. You've got to develop a multi-barrier process that's robust. It's essential. Human error is inevitable. We all make mistakes. Not me. Just kidding. We all make mistakes. And nature's really not supportive of us. It's like it seems to be trying to kill us at every turn. We're getting... the multi-barriers help reduce those risks by plugging the holes in our system. And the multi-barrier concept has been advocated for many decades. Instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, that's the real root of the terminology for multi-barrier. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Spread them around so that you have multiple things to protect yourself. And the focus on optimizing barrier performances, it's not just compliance. We optimize performance for public health, for compliance reasons, but it also helps improve our overall water quality and the cost of delivery. Under robust multi-barriers, again, the multi-barriers may seem redundant and may be perceived as an unnecessary cost or a red tape. Source water protection has not been considered a very friendly thing. It's been an issue. But it's there to help prevent further degradation of our water quality source. Our water is getting better. The Bay of Quinte is coming off of the International Joint Lakes Committee, Great Lakes Committee hotspots. It was one of the 29 hotspots. It's coming off. The water is getting better. However, optimized multi-barrier approaches are cost-effective in achieving negligible risk for safe drinking water. Again, if your water source, if you let it degrade, the cost of your facility goes way up in treating it. And instead of it being a $10 million plant, it becomes a $20 million plant or a $30 million plant or a $40 million plant. And the rule right now is that for every liter of water that you wish to produce, it costs $7 for expansion, between 7 and 11, depending on the process that's in place. So if you want to put an extra million liters of production in, it's between $7 and $11 million. Trouble usually preceded by change. That was that third one, that third bullet that we talked about. Well, treatment process generally function best when it's under a constant load or constant conditions. Over 70% of the outbreaks, they occurred because of extreme weather. Heavy rainfall, deep freezing, earthquakes, algal blooms, something caused by an extreme weather event. Those events are becoming more frequent and more extreme. We're seeing ice events. We're seeing intense rainfalls where we have localized flooding, much greater than we have historically. They're saying that that's going to happen more in the future. We have to have extra vigilance is required when changes in process and operations are made. Because when you change process operation or change a coagulant or change a chemical process or change the way that you're moving, that's when the possibility of infiltration or breakthrough can occur. And then operators must predict and react to problems through experience and training. So the operators that are under your care have to be able to react which means that in some circumstances, that means that we have to have on call so that they're able to respond after hours, or a facility has to be running 24 hours a day. The fourth bullet was operators must be capable and responsive. Blaming human error is about as helpful as blaming a fall on gravity. Yeah, okay, I guess so. To blame someone else doesn't benefit anything. It's the easiest way, it's the easiest out to say that it's their fault or his fault or her fault, but it's not. It's a team. If one member of the team fails, the entire team could fail. That's why they're there, to provide a backup, to provide a security. Richard is out there every day watching, making sure the people that are under him are doing the jobs that they're supposed to do. And the people under him are watching what other people are supposed to do. And the people under them are watching what the equipment's doing to make sure that that phone is on. People make mistakes. The system has to be resilient to be able to adapt and to deal with those problems. Competent, well-informed, and dedicated staff are the best insurance for safety, for water. And the best operator is one who admits failure can happen, because they realize the limitations. The scariest person is a person who believes that they'll never be wrong, because they can go sideways so fast. I'd rather have a person that scored 70% on a test than someone who scored 99. Because the person who scored 99, you can never tell them that they don't know everything. You have to be able to adapt, to realize that stuff's going to fail. We're not perfect. But what we can do is mitigate the risk and have a plan in place to ensure that we protect the people of our communities. And all parties need to learn from past mistakes and failures from other places. Because if we don't learn from those failures, we're going to do them again. Or if we didn't learn from someone else's mistakes, we could do the same thing. And that doesn't benefit any of our communities. Operators must be capable and responsive again. In Ontario, there's a certification program. In the municipality of Belleville, the treatment facility is a level 4, the distribution facility is a level 3. The treatment operators must have 42 hours, 7 of which are a mandatory course. They must take a course that's specific and it's specified by the Ministry of the Environment. But 42 hours every 3 years in director-approved courses. These are courses that have high relevance and high importance to training regarded to water. And then 108 hours of on-the-job training to ensure that they understand how that piece of equipment. How many phones have you got there? 2 different ones, right? Are they the exact same? No, they're very different. So you have to learn. So just because you've had this phone for a period of time doesn't mean that you understand what that phone's going to do or how it's laid out. So we might have had a turbidimeter or a chlorine analyzer, or we would have had equipment that was in the field. And we don't understand, if we don't take the training on the new equipment and understand what it says and teach ourselves how to adapt to it, we can create our own problems because we haven't met our requirements. Ineffective training will ineffective training and support will prove to be a mistake if disaster strikes. Yes, so what we do is we provide everyone with safe driver training, but no idea how to deal with an emergency or boil water or adverse response. Don't teach them legislation, right? No, that's the wrong way to go. Just because it's expedient and easy, we don't take the easy route. We take something that means something because we need to develop our resources internally. And that's what a system should do. Operators need to be developed, trained, and expanded upon, and challenged. Small drinking water system operators are often supported by larger neighbors. And that happens throughout most of Eastern Ontario. Larger neighbors, so municipalities like Kingston, Belleville, Peterborough, Ottawa help support smaller municipalities in information exchange, providing of equipment, and knowledge base. And the 5th point was drinking water professionals must be accountable. You have to promote a culture of identifying trouble, not hiding it or avoiding it. Wow, that's a lot of coffee. That's saying a lot to me right now. You're hurting my feelings. So we have to promote that culture of identifying trouble, not hiding it. We've got to make sure that people feel comfortable coming forward. We have to listen to customer complaints. Because, again, Richard pointed out, how many kilometers of pipe? 215 kilometers of pipe. It's all underground. When a customer has a problem, it could be intermittent. We might not see it. We might miss it. But when they have a problem, people don't normally complain just for the sake of complaining. No, seriously. Most people don't. Most sane people don't do that. Most people deal with something usually in stride. And for someone to be able to react or to say something, it's usually pushed them over an edge. It's something that's created a doubt. Listening to the customer complaints. Do you record any, Richard? Every single one of them. And that's so that you can actually prove that you've went out. You've looked into the problem, tried to address it. And if it's serious enough, that pushes it ahead on the infrastructure renewal program. So it might change a project that might be 5 years down the road. If it's proved that there is a problem, and that problem is a potential health risk, that'll move it up. Because again, $1,500 for that 1 meter measurement is very expensive to move someone up. And it takes 100 years to go through the system. Management must document incidents to maximize opportunities from learning from the past. The reason you do that is because you can learn from the past. We did A, B, C, and that fixed problem G. So whenever we see problem G, the first thing you do is you go back and use that same process to see if that corrects it. And if it doesn't, you try to find something else that adapts to it. Management staff have to support the operators and inform the owner of any issues. That's where a report will come to you or an email in advance so that you're informed that something might be going sideways or there's a large potential impact on the drinking water system. Effective risk management requires informed decision making. And again, that's you. To make that effective risk management, it requires being preventative rather than reactive. If I were to throw something to the clerk, Mr. McDonald, he would, and if I informed him, he'd be able to catch it, because that's preventative. If I didn't tell him that, and then I just threw it, the potential of hitting him and injuring him would be much higher, and that would be very costly for me. Reactive behavior is a poor adaptation. If you're always reacting, that means you're never getting ahead. You never can improve, because what you have to do is always react to stay the same. We have to be able to distinguish greater risks from lesser ones. There's only a finite amount of money, and we have to be able to identify to you what needs priority. If we provide you with mixed messages, you can't do your job effectively, and your jobs are critical. We have to deal with the greater risks first and learn from experiences. And sensible decisions depend on a commitment to understand, and we hid the information. What it says underneath that risk, it says your system. So sensible decisions depend on the commitment to understand your system. If people don't make a commitment to understand and expand and build upon your system, you'll never have an effective multi-barrier approach for water quality. Risk management summary. Your operational plan, and by the way, that book that's the only book, Richard? Or is there many other books? Several copies of that. Plus there's standards, there's legislative, there's procedures, standard operating procedures, emergency operating procedures, transitional procedures, and 6 books of legislation. Each are 3-inch binders. And those are the things that we have to be informed on to stay ahead of. So that means monitoring the Gazette, monitoring legislation, paying attention to the Canadian Environmental Legal Association, paying attention to MOE news and updates so that we can be ready before it's too late. Risks must be reviewed every 2 to 3 years because, well, Clerk MacDonald, cooties are not probably that much of an issue today for you as they were when you were 10. Risks change, right? It's not one of the things that you're worried about getting cooties today. So, our risks change with time. Are you still worried about cooties? Oh, girls give you cooties. So, yeah, things change with time. And when things change with time, sorry, I don't mean to digress. The whole point is that we have to look at those risks to determine, are they still a risk? Or did we do something to prevent that risk because we used a preventative approach to eliminate that risk once and for all? So we have to determine, because things change. And when they change, this piece of equipment, we fixed it. It's brand new. It's going to last for 25 years. What's happening to this piece of equipment over here? It's getting older. So no offense. So then we have to repair you. And then we have to repair the next piece. And we have to keep going down the line. The risks will change, and we have to assess those risks. And we have to understand the risks for our utility and act to address the problems. We can't just let them go. In Section 3, we look at case studies. Continue on, right? Does anyone need a bio break or anything? No? Rock and roll. So, Section 3, case studies. Water-related disasters. We're going to look at 4. We're going to look at the disease outbreak in Walkerton. What caused it? What could have prevented it? What did we learn from it? We're going to look at North Battleford, Saskatchewan. We're going to look at the lead contamination in Flint, Michigan, and the distribution system contamination in Stratford. And we're going to apply that multi-barrier approach to see which sections failed, how they failed, and in each of these cases, we're going to see that multiple pieces were at play. Walkerton, May 2000. Very picturesque, isn't it? Isn't that pretty? Would you drink the water from that river right there? No, not a chance. Now, what they had was a shallow groundwater well. It was heavily contaminated by bacteria from cattle manure from a local farm. They had 8 inches of rain in a short period of time. Again, saturation. The manure pit on this farm was uphill from one of their wells. They had a beautiful well. It was pointed out by the Ministry of the Environment that it was not secure. And if they turned the pump on, the babbling stream and swamp that was, or spring that was outside, would stop babbling. It would become smooth, which meant that it was a straight infiltration from surface water into the groundwater. See, in groundwater, if it's real, true groundwater, the earth actually does all of the processes that a treatment facility does. It just takes hundreds of years to get there. People don't have that time, so we speed it up in a municipal system through flocculation, sedimentation, filtration, disinfection. If you have a true groundwater source, you don't get bacteria infiltrating your well. Now, in this situation, they have a population, depending on what you were looking at, someplace between 3,500 and 5,600 people, depending on what environs you were talking about. 2,300 individuals were estimated to have become ill. Now, Councillor Culhane, in medical terms, is that the true extent, or is that just the tip of the iceberg?
Tip of the iceberg. Depends on the individual's ability to handle that.
Correct. And a municipality like Belleville, if that was the same application, we have what's known as a transient resident. People that come in during the day to shop to work, and then they go out at the end of the day. Or they come in for a couple of days and leave. And those individuals can change our population. Instead of it being 40,000 in the urban area, it could make it 80,000 for demand. And then at the end of the day, they go back out. So, in Walkerton, 2,300 people were estimated to have fallen ill. And they fell ill to E. coli O157H6. That was 60% of the people. That's a specific strain that was found genetically to match the cattle on the Biesenthal farm that was upland from that well, number 5. The other 40% suffered from Campylobacter jejuni. And I don't know if you've ever watched any of the Twin Ricks or any of that other stuff, and they had that dancing pathogen with the hula skirt. That's Campylobacter jejuni. It'll make you sick. 65 people were hospitalized. 27 people developed hemolytic uremic syndrome, HUS, and 7 died. The first person to die was a 2-year-old child. And the way that they die is horrific, because the body tries to purge the pathogens by increasing the temperature, expelling fluids, vomiting, diarrhea, bloody diarrhea, entire linings disappearing, and then you get failure. Because if you dehydrate to the point, you're going to lose consciousness. Your organs will stop, and you die. You can drink all you want, but if that source water is contaminated, in this case it was, people just got sicker and sicker, and then they died. The people that died, 4 children, 2 seniors, and 1 person with a compromised immune system. The weakest in our society suffer from outbreaks. It doesn't impact the strong. It impacts those that don't have a developed immune system, those that have a compromised immune system, or one whose system is dying with time. $9 million on a public inquiry was spent. That was $9 million just on the inquiry. Over $60 million was spent in the community for superchlorination, removal of material, bringing in outside operating authorities, and running for more than 9 months where the water was not safe to drink. They found hundreds of cross connections. Almost every home in that community had a cross connection in which they had either a cistern or a private well, and they were actually able to cross connect with the municipality. Hundreds as part of that survey. In the O'Connor report, it determined causes and it recommended actions. And the actions were training, because the one thing that the Coble said on the stand, I didn't know. I didn't know. And they had tears streaming down their face. They were genuinely upset. They had no idea. Well, we thought the water was always safe. We thought everything was good. Is your phone working? They didn't check. They wrote down the same chlorine residual every single day, even though the unit was off. That's negligent. They didn't bother sampling. They said we took samples from 8 different locations in the municipality. They took it all from the same place, and they just labeled it someplace else. And then, when the results came in, they said, is something wrong? Ask me, is something wrong? No, everything's fine. Again?
Is something wrong?
No, everything's fine. As they went out. And they didn't know what they were doing or what they were dealing with. So what they did was they went out, I'll flush the water out. The problem wasn't the water in the pipe. It was the water in the well. So when they started opening up hydrants, they were opening up hydrants right in front of their own homes. So instead of containing the outbreak to a certain small area, instead, let's open up the pipes and bring it to every far corner of our municipality. So instead of exposing just these 2 fine gentlemen here, let's expose everyone. Because they didn't know. That was that training. Walkerton experienced the heavy rains the 2nd weekend of May. The lab spoke to the general manager. Oh gosh, I'm a general manager. They spoke to the GM to advise that the water samples failed. On 3 occasions, the GM assured the health unit, everything is fine. Everything is fine. Councillor Kelly, you're a good Catholic boy. Who else denied something 3 times? That was Peter. See where that ended up. 3 denials that there was something wrong. Again, that first victim died in the 3rd week of May, 1 week after the outbreak, 1 week after the contamination of water. That's the Saugeen River before, right there. And then you can see the turbulence after. When you're dealing with storm water, the amount of bacteria in storm water is equivalent to sewage. That's what it is. It's not a spring. Well 5, commissioned in 1978, was contaminated during the initial and subsequent testing. Despite the problems, no MOE inspector had been on site since the 1980s. That's that complacency. They knew there was problems. They've had issue before. DNA analysis of the bacteria from the human victims matched the Beeson Falls farm. Chlorine disinfection was not being applied properly. It wasn't being applied at all. The term, again, from the people that said, I didn't know, is I didn't know a defense, Councillor Carr. If I went in front of a judge and said, I didn't know that putting an axe in someone's head would kill them, they would probably say you're the stupidest person and you need to be locked up. They didn't apply chlorine. They didn't apply it because the girls in the office didn't like the taste. Something as subjective, as sexist as that, was a determining factor, or it was a reason for them. Yeah. The investigation showed that water levels in the nearby surface pond dropped whenever the well was running. So all of that manure that overflowed the manure pit from a cattle farm that had cattle, it's idyllic, isn't it? It was by a stream or a swamp and you see them wandering out right into the water. Never see that, right? And they used well 5 to obtain soft water because groundwater is hard. True groundwater is hard. You remember that because what's in the ground? Rocks. Are rocks soft? No, they're hard. Surface water, which has bacteria in it, starts with an S, and it's soft. So if you have soft water from a groundwater source, what that means is you have surface water in your groundwater, which means it's directly contaminated. When anyone has a dug well, I won't go on about that, but an example of mine was my brother-in-law. He asked me to look at his well. I said, no, get it tested. He said, oh, please come out and look at my well. I said, no, take a sample and bring it to the health unit. And then I was there. And he said, oh, just come on, just take a look in the well. I looked in the well, it was full of snakes. Snakes don't go in a well, they go after something else. By the time we were done, we took out a 5-gallon pail of critter skeletons that he had been drinking with his family. And that was a dug well, because anything from the surface can enter a dug well. So, well 5 was soft water. That's an alarm bell. People couldn't recognize that. That was the active farm. It was uphill from well 5, which was in a swamp. This is what happened. So remember when we talked about that threshold? This was the threshold. May 12th, the contamination occurred. The 13th, first missed opportunity to detect contamination because they didn't bother writing down the residual. If you ever take a chlorine residual, you'll never get the same answer twice in a row. They had 30 days, and it was amazing because they were able to predict the residual 15 days into the future. On the 17th, they had an adverse result. It went to Stan Coble, the GM. He said that the water's contaminated. The health unit doesn't get to know about that because I didn't have to provide it to them. Then they asked me, is the water safe? And Mr. Coble said, yeah, the water's safe, don't worry about it. Even though he had the information right there in his hand, saying that high levels of bacteria were found in the water. May 18th. At this point here, the 17th, the health unit started getting suspicious because they just recorded up to 130 cases that day of gastrointestinal distress. Was there something wrong? No. The next day, it went up almost to 140. Is there something wrong? No. On the 19th, is there something wrong? No. We got 140 people for the last 3 days in a row getting sick. I don't care what you say. We're going to test our own water. So the health unit goes out. They continue to say that it's okay. The health unit gets results 2 days later. They issue a boil water advisory. They say if you want to be safe, boil the water. And in this case, see, the length of the time that you boil the water is an indication of how bad it is. If it says boil it for 1 minute, there's a probability that something could be there, but it's not a high risk. But take a precaution. If it goes to 3 minutes, they're a little more concerned. 5 minutes, they have great concern. In Walkerton, they said boil it for 10 minutes. May 22nd, the first victim died. May 25th, Dr. McQuigg gives media interviews to explain that information had been withheld. Now think about it from the perspective of the councillors of that municipality. The councillors couldn't be responsible for that. Because how could you make an informed decision if I wouldn't tell you? All you could do is react after the fact. The summary of the analysis, the source water protection portion of it failed. Well 5 was not suitable. It had been in an outbreak before. And the only reason that they hadn't had loss of life prior to that was that they were just lucky. That well, geologically, was in a vulnerable surface contamination area and had clear indications of vulnerability, but it was ignored. On the treatment side, chlorine is needed for that disinfection. It either inactivates or destroys or disrupts the microorganism. They didn't add it. Operators didn't measure the chlorine residual properly because faking it's not proper. And chlorine dose was inconsistent and less than required. But prior to the Safe Drinking Water Act, there was no rules. This changed the game forever. What happened in Walkerton was something that you would assume would happen in a third world nation. Not in a first world nation, one of the richest countries in the world. The distribution and storage, it failed. Many distribution and storage vulnerabilities were found, but none were significant contributors to this case. But they found all kinds of cross connections. Monitoring, daily chlorine residual testing was not done. Monthly samples were often intentionally mislabeled. Again, all the samples were taken from the same location, but said they took it from all over the municipality. Laboratory reported microbiological contamination to the client. Municipality was withheld. Every single thing that's up there is law now. In Reg 170, 253, 169, and the Safe Drinking Water Act. We have to monitor for chlorine. We have to do our diligence. We have the reports. They don't just come to me, because if I'm a liar, I'm a liar forever, right? So now the results go to you and to me because you can't trust me. And the unit, the public health unit, their primary responsibility is to protect public health. And they couldn't do their fundamental job because they were lied to. And that's why they changed that part of the regulation. And on the management side, that was a complete cluster. That was from every level. Owner, which was a utility, did not provide sufficient oversight. They had bad samples. They didn't do anything about it. Issues were raised by the ministry. They didn't do anything about it. They lied. They falsified data. The system was not maintained. And the regulators failed in their oversight rule. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. They said that well was bad. They didn't shut it down. They didn't follow up because they didn't have teeth to do anything about it. That's a problem. And the staff that were there, they were good guys. Didn't have a clue what they were doing because they were someone's cousin's brother's friend's uncle. You don't breed good help. You train it. You create it. In the O'Connor inquiry, it failed at every level. All 5 methods of protection in the multivariate approach, Walkerton failed at. That's why it became such stress. That's why it changed the game forever. Complacency was evident at every level. And at that time, the only difference between Walkerton and most municipalities in the province of Ontario was luck. A lot of municipalities could have fallen under that rule. So this changed the game for good. Multiple factors came together to cause the disaster. The farm, the bad well, the heavy rain. Staff not doing their job and lying. The outbreak could have been reduced or prevented by measuring the chlorine residual or just responding. Just saying, we've made a mistake. There's a problem. To protect yourself, take this action. Concluding thoughts on Walkerton in 2000, the microbiological contamination should have been reported to the health unit. That's a duh. The estimated economic cost of the outbreak, so that was both remediation and economic factors, $72 million. Social and personal costs are incalculable. Approximate cost of system upgrades at the time, $10 million. 7-to-1 ratio. Sad news just happened. One of the people that were victimized by this just died. He was provided an assisted suicide in the city of Toronto because he couldn't live any longer. The pain and the suffering that he was still suffering from what happened in Walkerton, they took his life. He took his own life through medically assisted suicide. How many lives was shortened? Even losing a day is precious. And lots of people lost great experiences with their children. Those families that lost those 4 children can never regain them. And the pain was based on the trust of a public official. North Battleford, Saskatchewan. This one here is one that should always be understood from a political standpoint. This is one that was bad news. This happened in 2001, just after Walkerton. In the spring of 2001, raw water serving the city of North Battleford, Saskatchewan, approximate population 15,000, was contaminated by the protozoan parasite Cryptosporidium. Cryptosporidium originated from the city's sewage plant, which was 3.5 kilometers upstream. Just think about that. What's flowing to your water intake? An estimated 5,800 to 7,100 individuals in that population of 15,000 became ill. The public inquiry by Honorable Robert Ling was called to investigate the cause of the outbreak. Now, I don't know if you can see it here. There's an island right here. Treated sewage would discharge here, and the water intake was there. See, they saved some money by not going to the other side of the island. We cut 50 meters, and we saved $1,500 for that length by not putting the discharge to the other side of the island, which means that it would have flowed completely around the water treatment plant intake. So it flowed. You could see the intake from the effluent of the sewage plant. There it is. If they would have went to the other side of the island, it would have bypassed that entire thing. The history of the sewage treatment problems and the influence of the sewage on the drinking water plant have been well known. Boil water advisories were called in September of 2000 due to coliform bacteria and low chlorine residual. It exerted a huge amount of demand. The plant couldn't keep up. Just so much stuff was coming in. Inexperienced operators and poorly timed maintenance occurred in March. Poorly trained staff, they were all new, and they decided to do a big process change. The foreman retired in December 2000 after previous stress leave because he was unable to convince management to invest in the sewage treatment facility and the water treatment plant. The treatment plant used chlorination, which is ineffective against cryptosporidium, so particle removal was the only safety barrier. They knew they had a problem, they never adapted for it, they never moved to the change. Only improper repair by junior staff compromised the particle removal. They have a process, it's an upflow clarifier, it's a little bit of magic and science mixed together, and you have to really know what you're doing with it. They let the sludge blanket blow off, and the sludge blanket's what actually captures the pathogens. If there's nothing there to capture, it flowed on to the next part of the operation. You can see the counts started getting very high. The direct cause was sewage contamination of raw water. Cryptosporidium in the sewage spread, and it was a human source. DNA testing revealed it was human, which means if you drink it, you're drinking someone's poop. And then if it gives you the bloody diarrheas, you're flushing it back up to the headworks of your water plant. Problem was allowed to persist for 6 weeks. So they knew about it and did nothing. Operators were trying to improve operations to reduce risk, but they didn't have a clue what they were doing because they weren't trained and they were new, which is great. It's like having a big kit of stuff like IKEA furniture without having the instruction set and having the doinga-woinga thingy that puts the tools together. Council and senior management rejected attempts at improvement. That's a bad sign. You know who was responsible in this case? The summary, source water protection. No watershed protection program was in place. They knew there was problems. There was a long history of poor sewage treatment practices, and it was going back to 1963. That was when they installed the sewage plant in that municipality. No actions were taken on past problems, and the city continued to dispute the sewage theory even after it was proven. Oh, that wasn't us. It's not going to help. The treatment plant, chlorination alone was inadequate. Timing of equipment repair was poor. It's in the springtime. What happens in the spring? We get a thaw and a runoff, which means we add contaminants to the water, potential pathogens, and turbidity. And there was poor particle removal for weeks. Inexperienced operators didn't understand the limitations of their projects and their treatment. The distribution system, no deficiencies found. So it was only 2 of 3 so far. On the monitoring side, operators did not perform the tests required to optimize the process. Operating procedures were outdated, and they had a lack of experience and training. And on the management side, the owner failed to provide sufficient resources to run the system. There was regulatory neglect, poor communication between public health and the city and the province, caused a 6-week delay in identifying the outbreak and the issuance of the drinking water advisory. When they disputed the cause, because they disputed even after it was proven, and it was DNA tested to prove that it was human source, coming from the sewage plant that wasn't working right, they bragged that they didn't spend their $800 training budget in the last 3 years. $800 in training is what they had for all of their operational staff per year, and they never spent it in 3 years. We saved a lot of money. In Ontario, that could have been $4 million for each of their councillors and managers. Concluding thoughts. As with Walkerton case study, the inquiry revealed failures at every level. Unlike Walkerton tragedy, evidence that operators were trying to make improvements, but were frustrated. People were trying. They didn't have the resources, nor the tools, nor the knowledge to know what they were doing. And there was little evidence that lessons were learned from past failures. It's hard to say, I didn't know when this happened last year and the year before, and it's a carrying offense. Canadian Environmental Law Association, the people of North Battleford were let down. Refusal to spend money on the system despite large contingency funds. Provincial government was aware of the problems but didn't inspect the plants. Inexperienced operators were unable to heed the warning signs. And out-of-court settlement totaling $3.2 million, where the improvements to the plant would have been around $600,000. That's that 7-to-1 ratio again. Being reactive is very expensive. As a councillor in North Battleford, was there anything that they could have done to prevent the outbreak? They could have used that contingency fund. They could have spent the money to upgrade the facility. They didn't feel that that was a priority. In some of these other provinces, and again, going back in time, the cost of water is to improve the water system. It's a user-pays system in Ontario. In some other places, it wasn't. And municipalities paid for sins of the past. Because in the 80s and early 90s, recessionary periods hit, they had huge expansions in the 60s and 70s when they built. And in the 80s and 90s, they had recessionary periods where they didn't build or they didn't maintain what they had. So suddenly in the late 90s, we had an infrastructure deficit. And that deficit is still there today. It's getting smaller, but we're still catching up from what happened from the past. Flint, Michigan, which is about the worst that there is. Flint, Michigan makes me sick. It has a population of approximately 100,000 people. 49% of the people in Flint, Michigan live below the poverty line in the state of Michigan. So 100,000 people, 49,000 of whom live below the poverty line. They knew that there was a problem with corrosive water. The cost would have been somewhere in the vicinity of $36,500 a year for pH control and adjustment. And they refused it because they couldn't afford it because the municipality was bankrupt. When you break that down, it works out to 48 cents per person. The state of Michigan and the controller did not believe you were worth 48 cents a year. So let's take a look at what happened there. Flint went bankrupt due to shrinking population from declining auto industry. We put protections in place to preserve our municipalities, to make them livable. Flint does not attract industry. It's a declining and dying community. You build your infrastructure to make a community vibrant, to attract people to it. There's nothing attractive there. It's dying. It went bankrupt. Flint switched from the city of Detroit water supply to an untreated Flint River because they couldn't afford to pay Detroit for water anymore. State-appointed emergency managers, or EMs, made decisions. It wasn't the local officials. This is a bureaucrat that has no vested interest in that municipality is making the decision. Water chemistry differed significantly from the two sources. One was acidic. The one from Detroit came from the Detroit River, which is part of the Great Lakes system. It's a surface water source from the lakes. The Flint River is acidic. It's a different body of water. The Flint drinking water treatment plant was put into service before it was ready. So they hadn't finished it yet. They could treat the treated water from Detroit, but they couldn't treat the water from the river. Drinking water was sent to consumers without the appropriate treatment. The municipality's bankruptcy seems unlikely in Canada, according to economists. We're not to carry that much debt. And in Michigan's case, it was the funding of the pension funds of their staff that drove them into bankruptcy. Those financial pressures can impact municipal councils for decisions. The source water. The Flint River received unregulated discharges from industries and municipalities for decades. There was no source water protection. Because it was so desperate for any type of industry, they removed the environmental protection laws. To get 25 jobs, don't worry about the discharge. Don't worry about the deleterious effect that you can put to water. And I hate to say it, but we're seeing it in Bill 66. That was great timing. Is he on the phone? Oh, okay, good. This contamination was not the main cause of the problem. So that in itself wasn't the problem, what they were spilling into the river system. The water was naturally softer from the Flint River. It's more aggressive, much more aggressive, which means hard water creates scale. And with time, scale creates a protective coating. But soft water, if it's aggressive, it's going to dissolve scale. And that scale is going to build up a whole bunch of materials. All of those materials are going to be released first. And then, if lead was available, this corrosive water is going to dissolve it from lead surfaces. It became aggressive to the pipes in Flint's distribution system. The treatment process was very poorly controlled. It was a trial and error exercise. No corrosion control despite strong indications that they had to have it. There was inadequate equipment, ineffective operations, contamination with E. coli and THMs and bromates were present, and it provided a favorable condition for Legionella. So not only could they have E. coli, not only could they have high THMs and bromates, which are suspected carcinogens, and they were above their legal levels, so that causes an adverse. They could also be impacted by Legionella. If water is distributed from this plant in the next couple of weeks, it'll be against my direction. That was Mike Glasgow, the plant supervisor in Flint, Michigan in 2015. His opinion fell on deaf ears because it was outside of the municipal control. He was a municipal worker. He was part of the problem. We didn't have the money to pay for it. Again, less than 48 cents per person per year. The distribution system switched to a more chemically aggressive water caused increased leaching of lead. Now, in modern standards, we're not supposed to have lead surfaces. We have high-density polyethylene. We have copper. Brass has lead in it. So our standards now, we have annexes to the NSF 61, actually it's 372? 372 now, which says that we're not allowed to have lead in our brass fittings and in our service, below 0.5% or something. Very, very small number. Their system's old. They're not investing in infrastructure. They're bankrupt. And they were probably becoming bankrupt for a long period of time. So all of their system was old and was protected by that coating, that calcification that happened on the inside. The aggressive water broke that down, and suddenly the aggressive water started deteriorating something soft, that heavy metal. Attempts to flush the system were unsuccessful because, again, when you got aggressive water, it takes steel pipe and creates a tuberculation, which what it does is it actually reduces the inside water carrying capacity of the pipe. Water's not able to flow freely, destroying chlorine residual, driving up THMs, creating other problems. And a large percentage of the homes had lead services because lead was easy to manipulate and easy to work with. You could shape it, bend it, and put it in whatever form you wanted, and it was cheap. On the monitoring side of the multi-barrier approach, they failed. Test results were intentionally omitted to reduce the average lead levels. So if you don't get as much result, if you fake some and drop them, your results will be better. That's another one of them cases of lying. Test results by experts were dismissed as inaccurate. Monitoring equipment had not been installed. Poor record keeping, because that's that currency, correct, Councillor Carr? They didn't have any. So it's, well, take my word. I don't know, you lied to me up there. You hid information. And the treated water quality varied widely, suggesting that the operations were really hit and miss. One operator might be good, the other one might be bad. It just continued to vary. And on the management side, all levels of the regulatory management failed. The ones that didn't fail really were the councillors. I mean, they drove their municipality into bankruptcy, but that was a history. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, so the MDEQ, well, them, the health units, the Genesee County Health Department, and the US EPA, they all failed. They didn't do anything. The emergency managers that were brought in to deal with the bankruptcy made all decisions involving financial matters. Councillors had no control of financing. At the end of the day, their councillors debated nothing of consequence. Concluding thoughts for Flint, Michigan. Bless you. All of the barriers failed in Flint. The source water was contaminated. The treatment process didn't work. The distribution system failed. They didn't monitor properly, or they omitted tests, and the management overall failed the citizens of their community. 15 individuals were criminally charged. The charges ranged from involuntary manslaughter, conspiracy, misconduct in office, willful negligence of duty, obstruction of justice. This isn't Trump we're talking about. Yet. And the last one, tampering with evidence. Oh my gosh, I walked into that, didn't I? The task force report, Flint Public Works' role in the crisis appears attributable to the inexperienced, poorly resourced organization struggling to take on an enormous and unattainable responsibility. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality caused the crisis to happen. Moreover, when confronted with the evidence of its failures, their Ministry of the Department of Environment wasn't us. We'll be belligerent about it. You don't know what you're talking about. We did everything we were supposed to. That doesn't help anyone. If there's involuntary manslaughter, that means someone died. And several kids are still suffering. Young children, heavy metals get embedded into the fatty tissues of the brain tissues. It interferes with the nervous system. It slows or hampers the mental development and the neurological response of children during that critical age of 2 to 3 years of age, where those synapses and neurons are just firing and they're making those connections. And it slows their learning ability. Lead's been traced. When they took the lead out of paint and fume gas, they noticed lower rates of violent crimes, reviditive crimes, in areas of poorer populations. The higher the lead, the greater the chance of having the mental deficiencies to create crimes. Concluding thoughts. March 2017, the Canadian federal government proposed a reduction in lead guidelines from 10 micrograms, that's parts per billion, to 5 micrograms in drinking water. If Ontario were to follow the reduced regulated amount, again, that's up for debate, but if Ontario follows it, That would be our new limit. Would we be able to meet it? Yes. Very low, usually non-detect. Is that right, Richard? Yeah, so it'd be zero. In our case, our results would come in at 0.001, where we're allowed to have 0.01. So they're very low. We do not have any lead services any longer, do we?
According to our records, we do not have any lead services. We do have a small number of assured lead connections, but based on our testing, that doesn't seem to be an issue.
And again, when you go to do those tests, you should look in areas that are scary. There's that old analogy where the police officer sees the man staggering underneath the streetlight. And he says, "What are you doing?" "I'm looking for my house keys." And the police officer offers, "Well, can I help you? Where'd you lose them?" "Over there." "Well, why are you looking here?" "Well, the light's better here." You got to go look in the dark spots. You got to go look in the scary spots. Yes?
Do we know how many lead services exist on the private side?
It's not our problem. I'm just kidding.
No, I'm just saying, do we know that, or that's...
When we do our lead testing, we have to do residential lead testing as well. And if a result comes back as non-compliant or adverse, then we have to provide a letter to the customer, and they have to take remedial actions. We're informing them of the issue.
So you're taking a sample
At
at their tap?
their taps.
So, just for everybody's information, Barry, how often do we do those tests?
Lead sampling is required twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. There are all sorts of requirements around it. We have actually gotten into an exemption status because our results have been so good that we can reduce the number of samples and the frequency. So I think where we're at right now, rather than lead sampling, I think we have to do alkalinity sampling, which is basically checking the quality of the water to watch for those changes in the quality of the water for salinity.
And so how often would we test water in homeowners? We'd ask permission to go in and take a sample from there, because what is for everyone's sake, well, how often does it happen in a year?
For lead or
Everything, just basic.
currently? We do the bacteriological sampling, which, as Barry said earlier, I think is about 80 a month. They're taken from taps. For the most part, we do a few municipal facilities as well. Lead, I forget what the number is now that we have to do for alkalinity. Lead, I think it was in the dozens that we have to do twice per year when we were doing that. Alkalinity, it's less than that. There are other parameters that we do, which most of our sampling is done at the tap. I mean, we do hundreds of samples a year.
And how do you determine the places you sample from? Is it random? Do you have a relationship with people that you're going? Is it geographically based?
It depends. The legislation that we Barry said, we're looking for the lead, which varies, right? Lead, you're looking for areas that have lead swimming in the pipe somewhere.
Houses that are built in the 60s prior.
Amos, question?
Thank you. Has anyone ever had to change the piping in their house?
I can say that I don't know. We've had customers that have had elevated lead samples, in their household plumbing, because we actually test the plumbing in that particular case, where the water has to sit for a period of time, and that's where you draw it off, and you're drawing 3 samples in short order, and they're separated by about 5 minutes between each one. But what they represent is the standing water in the house, and that's why it's a customer's responsibility at that time, because it's showing that the fittings in their house or the potential is there that they have lead solder or other issues with lead.
There's a standard, as you said.
Yes.
Amount that's allowable. So you do the testing, and you come back to me as the homeowner and say you have an issue with lead in your water. Then what's the consequence for me?
You can use filtration units, flushing. not letting the water sit stagnant. Or you could go to the extent of replacing your plumbing if you wanted to.
I don't recall any sample result that exceeded the standard.
But,
Now,
yeah.
we have had some where we've exceeded the standard, and then there's protocol adjustments. Generally, you have to go back and re-sample that location, and I don't recall any where we failed.
The second time.
So it was some anomaly, and then we would normally include that location in our next round of sampling just to do a second check.
If we failed on the municipal side, and we had 2 of the, because they're every 6 months, 2 of any 3 consecutive samples showing exceedances, then we'd have to create a corrosion control plan for the Ministry of the Environment to tell them how we're going to address the corrosion problems to mitigate lead. It is.
So, we're gonna start right a second here on case 3 at 7:30. Does anyone want to break for a little bit just to keep on going through? Carry on.
Okay. Case study 3, Stratford. Stratford was interesting. It was a cross-connection event. At 10:20 a.m., there was a call to the City Water Division of pink foaming water from the tap. A little bit of background beyond that, the call went in, it's pink and foaming and smells of pina coladas. That was the full, but we didn't add that one part. Smells of pina coladas. At 10:30, the water supervisor confirms, yes, the water is pink and foaming coming from the tap. At 11 o'clock, they visited an adjacent car wash and shut the water off to the car wash. At 11:07, they called the health unit and MOE because they were in a facility. They found where it came from. Now they got a piece of paper in their hand, and that piece of paper is the SDS. At that time, it was an MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheet. They have the information of what entered their system. At 11:30, they commenced flushing hydrants. There's the car wash, and that was the house on Erie Street that experienced the pink foaming water. And it wasn't from their tap, it was from their toilet. So if you flushed and you looked back and you saw pink, it would be quite concerning. It's not an early pregnancy test, not an EPT2. It's just, and it smelled like pina coladas. It was a rough evening. At 11:40, there was a meeting with the city health unit and MOE. At 12 o'clock, a drinking water advisory was issued. This is a drinking water advisory. 12 o'clock, emergency plan was called out. At 1 o'clock, the emergency control group convenes. 1 o'clock, they called them the Stratford restaurants at that time. That's the only thing I'm critical about, because they put out a do not use the water at 12 o'clock, called the restaurants at 1. Now you can use the water to wash your dishes, though, by the way. There's good soap in it, just after the lunch rush. It's the only negative to the whole thing. It was actually a well-done operation. 11 o'clock, they called to arrange alternative water supplies. Because in this water advisory, it's not a boil water, it's a do not use. This is the advisory, and the part in red. Until further notification, all residents of Stratford are urged not to consume the water. As well, residents should not feed the water to pets or use the water for bathing or washing. What's left? You can't do anything with this water. See, because if you heat it up, and it's got soap in it, because that's what's in there, it's car wash soap. If you heat it up, you know what you got? Hot car wash soap. When it's a chemical, you can't boil it to get rid of it. All you're doing is concentrating and making it hot. That's going back to that meat soup thing again. People could get sick from this, because we're not supposed to be eating soap, no matter what our parents said when we were younger, and use bad language. The duration of the event was 56 hours. The number of volunteers, 80, with 640 hours. Volunteers. The number of flyers delivered, because they had to go to each residence. And they did that 4 times. Over 13,000. Because in this particular circumstance, they had to go to everyone's house to make sure that you know, and if I didn't get a hold of you, I'm going back and I'm making sure I'm putting that notice in there so that you know. Bottled water. 24,192 cases of bottled water were distributed during this event. That was donated by corporations like Walmart and Loblaws Corporation. They donated them. Literally moved transport trucks full of water to provide it. But they're providing water for 13,000 people. Bulk water was brought in, almost 200,000 liters. Staff hours at the water depots, 825, which you have to pay for. And the cost of the city, $188,000 for the event. Now, if we just go back, well, they don't say the population. But it usually works out to somewhere in the vicinity of about $40,000 per 10,000 population for boil water. So a municipality like Belleville would be at least a $200,000 hit if you had a boil water citywide, just to deal with notifications. Their website had 4,506 hits. Normally they get 500 in a month. Source water protection. Stratford source water, they get their water from 11 groundwater wells. Samples from the wells are routinely tested, met all requirements. This contamination was not the result of a problem from the source water. Source water was good. Treatment. Stratford uses chlorination for disinfection. No other treatment was required due to the high quality groundwater. The contamination was not the result of the treatment process. Distribution. This contamination was a direct result of an illegal cross-connection at the car wash facility. Detergent was inadvertently pumped into the municipal water supply because of backflow prevention equipment was not installed. The City of Stratford has a backflow prevention bylaw in place at the time that required backflow prevention equipment. That's what they had. This is on the private side. Copper pipe, brass fittings, what's that? Iron, and braided hose. None of this equipment would be legal in our system. But the customer was able to cobble it together behind the service. This is their backflow prevention device right there. It's a ball valve. That's not a backflow prevention device. The only two devices that are legally accepted, or most commonly used, are a double check and a reduced pressure principle backflow prevention device. They require testing to determine that they're functional. And the reduced pressure principle is the better of the two because when it fails, it actually creates an air gap between the two parts and water spills out onto the floor. So you see a physical indication that a backflow has occurred. Now, as I told you earlier, you cannot buy a pump that would overpower the city's pressure. The car wash pumps were putting out pressure at 80 psi. The city's pressure in the area was 65 psi. Two 210-barrel drums of car wash solution were discharged into the distribution system in short order. On the monitoring side, monitoring activities were not implicated in this contamination event. Monitoring program was utilized to help determine when drinking water was once again safe. This situation was actually a really interesting one because it shows the difference of what distribution operators are doing. They were driving around and they noticed these subtle differences between what they see. So they could see a puddle on the ground. Most people go, it's a puddle on the ground. Why are you fascinated by it? Well, it hasn't rained. There shouldn't be water there. Why is there water there? That means it could be a leak. In this particular case, the distribution operators driving in noticed that there was a large amount of activity going on by the car wash. So when the customer called in from across the road, the very first place that they went was to the car wash because of the large amount of activity. Why were there so many people there that morning? On the management side, backflow prevention devices are plumbing. Plumbing devices are not regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act because they're residential. It still falls back under the Ontario Building Code, OBC. That doesn't fall under the Safe Drinking Water auspices. Now, they put water into a drinking water system, which means they can be charged under the Drinking Water Act. But what happens on the private side is the private business's issue. The council had implemented a backflow prevention bylaw in 2004, but enforcement of the bylaw is challenging, but it's critically important. When you put something in place, a rule is only a rule if you can enforce it, which means that they had to have, excuse me, proper staff on hand, proper training, people available to do that type of training, or sorry, to do the testing, and, excuse me for a moment, they didn't have that. Concluding thoughts. A guide for drinking water system owners seeking to undertake a backflow prevention. There's a number right there. It's a publication, 97.6E. Backflow prevention is difficult. It creates constraints and restraints in water flow. It's costly, and a lot of people have issue. After the incident that occurred in Stratford, they had, because it did impact a lot of people, and the best way to drive home a point is to actually have someone financially impacted. Yes, sir.
The car wash, is it now a parking lot?
I don't know if it's a parking lot, but they did have personal fines of $75,000 and $50,000 labeled against, yes.
Under which
Under the Safe Drinking Water Act.
So, does our backwater bylaw, backwater flow prevention bylaw, have a fine in it?
Richard?
We don't have a specific bylaw for backflow preventers. Right now, we basically rely on the Ontario Building Code, which really this should have fallen under building code because it's plumbing work that was being done. So they had licensed plumbers and they had a building permit and building inspection, all that stuff, which they should have done. That would have been caught by that. We're in the process of investigating the need for backflow prevention bylaw.
But if you bring it forward, would you bring it forward with fines in it? Or contributing?
I would say quite likely that's the way most bylaws of that type are.
And then because the Stratford had a bylaw, were they able to recoup the cost of the city from that?
Not that was seen, because the municipality didn't enforce their bylaw, which means that they didn't have inspectors to go out to inspect it. A lot of things need to be in place for a backflow prevention bylaw, and a lot of municipalities have been waiting, because this conversation has gone on for many, many years, that the Ministry of the Environment was going to push this through the Safe Drinking Water Act for backflow prevention, at least for the ICI, or large industrial customers, industrial commercial customers, because on a residential scale it'll be difficult, especially retrofitting thousands upon thousands of services, but for the large commercial or industrial, which have the greatest risk of cross-contamination or damage, it would be something that's a little more manageable. Yes, sir.
So to that point, besides a pina colada smelling soap, I mean, what are the chances of something else coming from a business besides, like you said, industrial use?
Don't know.
I mean, residentially, what could you see about?
We've got food preparation plants in this city that
Mhm.
deal with seafood.
That's what I mean, industrial would be a big deal. But residential probably would be your low for that.
It would, you don't know. You don't know what someone has in their house. And that's the other thing, which I won't talk because we're streaming. The potential that's out there for infiltration is much higher. On the back side of the plumbing system in a private residential, it's a no-go zone for us. We put the meter on, And that's pretty much the last time we go in. Case study. So at the end of the case study section, what we know is that fecal contamination, pathogens, and potential contaminants are everywhere. Wherever humans and animals are, pathogens are present, and water's not far away. Some pathogens are difficult to treat. Some chlorine will not affect. It will not do anything against it. And cryptosporidium is one. It had seemed like an obscure risk, but Milwaukee in 1993 was a prime example. A community of 500,000 people, 300,000 of which became sick, over 50 were directly attributed to die in that situation. Complacency can arise because waterborne outbreaks are relatively rare. We get into a pattern. When we get into that routine, then we relax the vigilance, and that can lead to a disaster. On the distribution side, distribution systems are vulnerable. They are generally not visible. We only see the parts that are out of the ground, the hydrants, the towers, and the storage facilities. Leaks in pipes can allow contaminants and pathogens to enter in because you got the psst, and then you get a pressure inversion, you get the cross connections can pose a threat, and backflow preventions bylaws can be put in place. But with all of those things, you have to have all of the components in place. Don't just start with one piece. You got to make sure that you have all of the other pieces to help make sure that it works. Issues that initially appeared to be of little concern come under intense scrutiny when something goes wrong. So what's next? Practical steps that we can take to ensure effective oversight. We can ensure good internal and external communication. Promote a mentality of continuous improvement. We always have to get better. There's always a risk. We have to promote and understand the entire system, not just one piece or another. It's an integrated team of components and people, all working together. We have to understand the challenges, and we have to know what our limits are. Understanding those limits always will keep us within our guidance. We always have to maintain robust multi-barriers from source to tap, and there has to be a commitment to learn from the mistakes of the past. You need to enable recognition of new risks and threats by operational staff. Staff have to have that training to understand what is considered wrong. We have to ensure that staff understand that they are entrusted with protecting public health. Operational personnel should be given, oh, I like this one, the status, training, compensation comparable with their responsibilities as guardians of public health, according to Justice O'Connor. It is true. There is something that's uniquely different. A negligent action or a failure or a lack of understanding, an operator at a plant affects more than just themselves or those that are around them. They have the potential to impact every man, woman, and child in a municipality. Because once the water goes out, where does it go? I don't know. The only time I know where water flows in a municipality is when it comes out the tap. So if a contaminant enters the system and it's been a long enough contamination, the potential is there to make people sick. And we've got to provide sufficient resources. Milwaukee, Wisconsin experienced a massive waterborne outbreak in March and April of '93. More than 400,000 cases of cryptosporidiosis, 4,400 hospitalizations, 50 deaths. At the same time, Waterloo also experienced an outbreak of cryptosporidiosis, but they contained it at exactly the same time. There's been numerous disease outbreaks reported in Canada in the last 25 years. They're still happening because people are failing to learn. Municipal residential drinking water systems are inspected by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks inspectors. Inspections include source water. They look at the treatment processes, the distribution components, and they look at all of that data that we record, all of the tests the thousands and thousands and thousands of bits of information to see, did you have anything that was out of place? Yes, that was out of place. Did you report it? Oh, you did? That's all good. But the second you didn't, that's the lie. That's a noncompliance. Water quality monitoring procedures are practiced. An inspection report will highlight areas of noncompliance that require corrective actions. Sometimes you can have a noncompliance because you didn't do things in the right step or order. Didn't mean that there was issues with public health. It's just that something didn't happen in the proper procedural method. And what happens from there, if you don't learn from it, you're going to pay for it if you do it again. You're given a one shot. Learn from it. If it's not serious or risk, you have to advance and get better. The report includes an inspection rating to compare current and past performance of area and for areas of improvement. It reviews, you should review this report and the actions being taken to the response. Summary reports and annual reports are also required for municipalities. So the inspection reports can come at varying times during the year. Ministry inspectors generally go from anywhere from about 11 months to 18 months between inspections. And each system has a different inspection, but the annual report and the summary report has to be completed every year at the same time. And usually it'll come to council somewhere around March. Ensuring that operational staff receive meaningful training. And then you confirm they have a training plan so that staff move in a progressionary process, that they become better, stronger, faster. Training may need to go beyond regulated requirements to address operator needs. Customer complaints handling is not a compliance thing, but it's a very wise investment because they're working with the public in interacting and speaking properly. Logbook entries, all sorts of things like that. It takes several years for a new operator to progress. In the case of a Class 3 or 4, with 2 years post-secondary education, for a Class 4 operator, it takes 6 years in the field. Plus, you have to write certification exams. All that time. Course summary. As a council, as a utility, as a provider of water, and as a water authority, we have to foster competence in the people that work for us. We have to eliminate complacency, instill a culture of prevention, learn from the past where we make mistakes, admit them, and get stronger, emphasize good practices, promote that continual improvement, and provide the sufficient resources to continue to provide water quality to our customers for years to come. At the very beginning, we had 3 things to remember. One was it's your duty to provide safe water. It's your duty to be informed, and your duty to be vigilant. Thank you. Beyond the next few pages, there's questions that you should be able to ask or answer. And those are things that you can take away, because you'll ask every one of those questions, and then we'll have to answer it, and we'll be here till 9 o'clock. Any questions at this point?
So, Harry, just the difference between the Belleville water treatment facility and the Hamlet of Point Anne, they have different processes, but they are held to the same standards, correct?
Slightly different standards, because the Hamlet of Point Anne is classified as a small municipal drinking water system, so it has less frequent bacteriological testing. So you can have greater time lengths in between, but our systems are treated the same. Again, the legislation is the minimum, and we can do beyond the minimum. Did you want to add anything to that, Richard?
So the point is that we treat the seriousness of monitoring and ensuring good quality water the same. They're different systems, but we behave the same way.
The citizens of the hamlet of Point Anne are no less of value than the citizens of the city of Belleville. Everyone's health and safety is of critical importance.
Anyone else have any questions for Perry? So what are we going to do now, Perry?
Well, there's two things. One, as part of the continual improvement process for training, there's an evaluation sheet which details the 4 modules that we've covered to determine whether they've met your needs and requirements for training, whether they were conveyed in a manner that was effective, and whether the venue was an efficient venue. And then the second part that we have is a celebration of knowledge. There's 10 celebratory questions. I said there was a celebration of knowledge. I don't like tests. Tests are negative. Yes.
Just hit your microphone, please, because
Oh, sorry.
no problem.
I'm sorry. The tower, the water tower.
Yes.
How old is that?
How old is the water tower? Was that installed in 1954?
Yeah, I want to say mid-50s, early mid-50s.
That'd be my guess.
That replaced the old standpipe. That was, sorry, that was in the location before.
So the 50s. So what life expectancy does that have?
Well, you can answer that one, Richard, very easily.
Towers generally have a very long expectancy, like probably upwards of 75 to 100 years. I don't know exactly. We do regular inspections on it though.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a coating on that tower, for example, a paint coating, which is really protecting the underlying metal surface. So that's something that we inspect. That's something that we inspect. I think it's every 5 years we do a thorough inspection, and every 2 years we do a lower inspection. Somebody goes up there and actually looks at it. We bring somebody in, and then every 5 years we basically drain the tower and they do a very thorough inspection of it. They go inside.
That's exactly my next question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a few years ago we had the foundations inspected. So we brought a structural engineer in. They looked at the foundations. We actually had some work to do on the foundations, which that was completed a couple of years ago. So we do those types of things fairly regularly.
That's excellent. Thank you.
And currently, just to add a little more to that, we were supposed to have done an inspection this year. Would you care to elaborate on that one, Richard?
Yeah, we were actually scheduled this year to do the thorough inspection. We were going to drain it. Not the thorough inspection, but it was going to be drained and somebody was going to go up and have a look at it. The difference between the thorough and the lower degree, they actually go inside of the tower to do the inspection. Whereas the lower degree, we drain it, they go inside to what we call the crow's nest, and they look around from that one point without actually getting right into the bottom of the tank. We were scheduled to do that this year at the same time that the work was going on downtown. We didn't want to drain the tower at the time that the downtown project was going because our large diameter water main that feeds the tower was taken out of service to replace part of it as part of the downtown project. Then that project went late into the fall, so we ended up basically canceling the inspection for this year, and we're going to do it next year instead.
Thank you.
Okay. No. The question was, is there more than one answer for a question? Unless it's all of the above. Usually not. But we'll take this up as a group.
I thought there was going to be a prize.
Well, there could be a prize. At the end of it, you might get a...
I was going back to my notes.
Well, you can. That's the best way to do it. When you complete
I
it.
was told I could host the morning show in 97 if I did this right.
Well,
Big shot Kelly's there.
if you got more than... If you have more than 7 celebrations...
No, I don't think that's fun. I don't think that's
If you get more than 7 celebrations right, you get a large piece of paper that comes in the mail. If you have less, you get a small one. And the small one says you can write this again. I have 3 more minutes of your time.
Well, hide your sheet, he's looking over your shoulder.
All right, go through the answers, sir. I gotta pick my daughter up.
Okay. Are we ready to mark?
Oh,
Okay. So the first part, your name is important. If you didn't get that right, you failed. 1 out of 1. Excellent. Okay. The first question, mayors, councils, and municipal officials with oversight responsibility need to be drinking water experts. Do you need to be? False. You do not need to be. You need to act in a prudent manner that a reasonably normal person would act. Question number 2. Which of the following are generally perceived as the greatest threat to safe drinking water? A. Pathogens. A. Who does the standard of care apply to under Section 19 of the Safe Drinking Water Act? Does it apply to mayors? Does it apply to councillors? Does it apply to municipal or corporate officials? And D, any person with decision-making responsibilities for drinking water system. So the answer is D. Which of the following is, they wrote the word not, capitalized, not, directly a component of the multi-barrier approach. Is source water protection a multi-barrier? Is effective treatment? Secure distribution? How about customer surveys? Although we have one up on the city's website right now, that's not part of the Safe Drinking Water Act. That could be for the wastewater. Question number 5. Given the circumstances that occurred in Walkerton, which of the following is true? The disease outbreak was not in any way the fault of the operators? BS. Yeah, that's right. Because it actually was BS that caused the manure. The treatment process at the time was capable of dealing with it? No. The public inquiry suggested failures at every level. Yeah, C. Who made the financial decisions that led to the crisis in Flint, Michigan? The state appointed emergency manager, B. Question number 7. Inspection of drinking water systems by the regulator are useful because? Now, that was one of those ones that perhaps Councillor Millett, I said, unless it's all of the above?
All of the above. All of the above.
Okay. D, all of the above. Question number 8. Pathogenic organisms are a widespread risk of causing waterborne disease because they cannot be treated by antibiotics. No, you said C. Are they all resistant?
no.
They're B. They're found virtually anywhere people and animals are found. Reliance on source water protection. Reliance on source water protection as the sole barrier to drinking water contamination is an excellent idea. It's an excellent idea because it's the cheapest solution. It's risky because there are practical limits to achieving a low enough risk. C. And the last question. Why is it important to provide sufficient resources for operating a drinking water system? And D, all of the above. Okay. Now, I'll take those back from you. I have to submit them. Oh, sorry.
This is bad. I only got 8.
No.
Perry?
We're not allowed to use whiteout in the water industry because that's falsification of records.
Do I have to hand mine in?
Okay.
Or hide the fact?
Good presentation.
Yeah, you gotta hand it in.
I got one round.
No, I got my first one.
So thank you very much, Perry, for the excellent presentation and the, what did you call it? The celebration of
Knowledge.
knowledge. We all appreciate that. Richard, thank you for coming and joining us today and providing that information. And thank you to both of you for your roles in protecting public health and the safety of our water system. I think everybody has learned a lot, both through the orientation tours, but also through today's presentation. It is very serious for us as elected officials, and we appreciate that time, and we thank you.
Beautifully done.
We have a resolution that was moved and seconded. I will call it. It was the one that the standard of care training session be received. So all in favor? It's carried. Motion to rise and report, moved by Councillor Sandison, seconded by Councillor McCaw. All in favor? It's carried. Confirmatory bylaw. That bylaw number 2018-209, a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its special meeting held on December 13, 2018, be read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed this 13th day of December 2018. Moved by Councillor Carr, seconded by Councillor Williams. All in favor? It's carried. Motion to adjourn. Who have I not got yet so far? Councillor Culhane and Councillor Millette. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Proceeding.